Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our last board meeting of June and the year of 2022, the school year. So this is an exciting time for us. We just had the pleasure of a young group of singers from Ecole College Heights. And we are just so delighted. It warms our heart when the children grace our room and bring joy to our world. We are very fortunate to have such wonderful kids in our schools and leaders and teachers who spend so much time encouraging them to perform and to be the best that they can be. So on that note, I will call this meeting to order, and I would like to ask Trustee Bennett if he would please do the acknowledgement of the traditional territory. Trustee Bennett.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And when I walked in this evening, the sun was shining, and it's a beautiful day out there. I'd like to acknowledge that we are joining you today from the ancestral lands of Lake Tenay, serving children throughout the district as well on the traditional territory of the Lake Indian Band and the First Nations. And it's, I think, important to recognize that yesterday was the national International Indigenous Day with celebrations out in McLeod Lake and down at Clit Lake Tenay, and I had the opportunity to be down at Clit Lake Tenay for a portion of the morning yesterday with other trustees, and I know Trustee Weber was very involved with the celebrations at McLeod Lake, and it was, despite the rain, it was truly I think a great celebration, and the energy from the kids was pretty incredible. And there was, I think, this was it was just great to have thousands of students involved with the celebrations, and hope to see that number increase in future years. And it's I'm getting a little bit of echo, so I apologize for that. And again, it looks like it's going to be a beautiful week throughout the region, and hope everyone gets a chance to get outside and enjoy the beautiful lands in which we live, work, and play.
Thank you, Trustee Bennett. We'll now move to approve the agenda as presented, and I believe we have some additions to the agenda in terms of handouts. So just as with trustees who are in charge of committees, would they like to acknowledge the handouts that they are responsible for? Trustee Thompson. Trustee Thompson will be providing the reports from Education Services, and Trustee Mello, just Trustee.
Yes, Chair. It is in the board book, but as submitted, my committee report for education programs planning and the Choice Management Committee presentation.
Thank you.
Shannon dates. Yeah.
Thank you. And is there anything? Are there any other adjustments to the agenda? Hearing none, could I have a motion to approve the agenda as adjusted? Trustee Thompson seconded. Trustee Mahoney, all in favor of the agenda as presented as adjusted? Thank you. And the agenda is approved. I'm going to now turn to public input, and we have the board thanks those who are wishing to take the time to present this evening. Any items that are brought forward are referred either to our senior administration or an appropriate standing committee for follow-up. And of course, if a presenter wishes to receive a response, we will make sure that a follow-up response is provided. And the board will, of course, not be commenting as normal when there's a presentation. And as normal, our vice chair will also act as timekeeper. We ask that presentations stay to a 5-minute limit, other than the presentation that we're getting from the Retired Teachers Association. So what I'm going to do then is invite presenters from the audience today. President Joanne Hapke, would you like to come forward?
Thanks, Chair. So this is my last meeting and wow, what a board book to go through. So I had a couple of things I wanted to comment on. And in the Enhanced Student Learning Report, there's a lot of change as support processes and systems are created and enhanced. Teachers working in classrooms must be part of these discussions. As the district is creating professional learning opportunities, please be mindful of the need for in-service for all programs that teachers must know in order to do their jobs. Not all teachers can access the professional learning opportunities after the school instructional hours for a variety of reasons. Please do not assume that teachers are making a choice to not attend. Sometimes there are barriers to our participation. And I recall a time when my 3 children were young and I had to go home immediately after the bell. And I did all of my professional work at home. But that was a barrier to me that one year. And also, as more data sources are being added to classrooms to support student learning, we need to ensure that the people who are doing the work, that we have the training. It is necessary that we understand why are we collecting it, what will it be used for, but how do we do that? And as we look to a statement, and we all are aware of this, that positive experiences for students are very important to their school success. We know that. We've been hearing that for years. Students need to identify with adults in the school so that they can be successful. I need you to please keep in mind, overworked, unwell teachers will not be able to meet these needs. Teachers need positive experience and positive interactions themselves. So as these changes are being implemented, there's so many. You have a lot of goals. You have like great aspirations, and we should always be aspiring for more. But there's so many. Please be aware that there's all of this and everything else. And so as we are looking into the Enhanced Student Learning Report and the statement, in addition to continuing with the strategies from year 1, the following adjustments will be made. And so as a teacher who's returning to the classroom, I was overwhelmed of everything that I was reading, all necessary, all vitally important. But where is the priority? Where is the understanding of how much time we can do with this? How much time do we have to implement everything that is necessary? And so my last statement, or one of my last statements, as you're looking at all of the policy changes, and my goodness, Trustee Beckering, you get to do a lot of presenting tonight. I'd like to acknowledge policy 8310 and the responsibility that the board has to teachers and the LOU that we signed. It's not mentioned anywhere. So we are acknowledged in policy 8310 as a right holders or stakeholders. But there should be recognition that there is collective agreement language, that there is an LOU there. So that is understood. I didn't, and I'm seeing that, yes, it's there. I did not see it. So if it's there, then that's good. Thank you.
Number 3.
Thank you for fixing that immediately. I appreciate it.
We got you,
Joanne. Right? It's your retirement gift.
I'm not retiring. But on that, I just want to say thank you. So I've been in this position as president, presenting to you for 5 years, and it has not always been easy. But what has always been wonderful is the respect that we have on both sides of the table, the understanding that we are all here for the children. And we can't help but look back on the presentation that just happened. Everybody was smiling, and it really enforces why we do this work, why we are here advocating on evenings when we could be home doing something different, but we are here with you to ensure that our advocacy, the needs of teachers, the rights of teachers are always forefront with the rights and needs of students and all of your other employee groups. So I just wanted to say thank you. It has been a pleasure. It has been wonderful. It really has, even though we haven't always agreed, and I get that, but we've always made a commitment to work together and understand the lens of which we bring to our conversation. So thank you.
Could I, let me see, who else do we have here today? I'm just looking around the crowd and
Laura's on Zoom.
Laura, and oh, so Laura, sorry, Laura, I didn't see you on Zoom. So I'm going to welcome you to the meeting. Go ahead, Laura.
Whew. Thank you. It's been a fun couple of days. I'm still drying out from yesterday. So you guys can hear me okay? Okay, awesome. Thank you. Just want to say, Hadi, thank you for letting Deepak address the board tonight. I am grateful to live on the unceded territory of the Lheidli people with my family. It has been great to build connections this year between parents and the school district trustees and our staff. The district PAC's mandate is to bring the parent voice to the district on topics that impact students and families. Second to students, parents and guardians and other designated adults are the largest constituency the school district must engage with. Must-see to the students and teachers and parent supporters for being here tonight to open tonight's meeting. It was lovely and so nice to start that way. Made my day. So for Deepak though, much work has been done this year to advance policy that supports students and families in school programming relative to the prioritized issues in the district. And we have made great progress on heavy topics. So just must-see, thank you very much for bringing that effort forward to keep that going. As we return from 2.5 pandemic years of broken connections with schools, in the coming year, Deepak will be working to build excitement, collaboration, and community around schools and PAC. Supporting PACs to encourage more engagement from the parent community will be our strongest focus. So we are starting strong by taking time to be present at community events like YMCA Healthy Kids Day and National Indigenous Peoples Day in the park. It was our pleasure to support these events as parent representatives. Our volunteers were a little cold and a lot wet by the time we packed in at the end of the day for both events, actually. It was a lot of fun to support Healthy Kids Day and the Lheidli community in hosting that event too. Thank you so much for busing the grade 6s and 7s to participate too. It really added to the festival energy and it just seemed like a lot of fun to participate in, and just I loved it. There was just big smiles on everybody's faces, so thank you so much for making that possible. I've only heard good things from students and parents that were able to attend, and I'm sure that next year's attendance will be even larger because we've had the grade 6s and 7s there, which we absolutely should. So thank you. It was also a huge learning opportunity for me, as it was the first time I was able to talk about the history of the park with my youngest child and share the importance of Lheidli T'enneh Memorial Park as a site of significance in Lheidli history and how it was impacted by colonial activity in the founding of the city of Prince George. And she was very touched by that. And it was important to share that with her. And it's not just where we go to play, it's where people lived and had everything established, and it was a great location and why, and then yeah, sharing how that ended, and she gets it. So thank you for that opportunity. Some other Deepak highlights from the past year, which went so very quickly, but this seems like forever ago at the same time. We hosted a speaking engagement on LGBTQ2+ identity with Ivan Coyote in November. We ran multiple surveys on topics of interest to parents to gain feedback and participation. Participated as a stakeholder group in the ongoing board meetings and in the ad hoc committees and the regular committee meetings. So it was a lot. We attended the BC Confederation of PAC's DPAC Summit in 2021 and the AGM and conference in 2022, where one of our members received a Lifetime Service Award, Jillian Burnett, past PAC chair, or past DPAC past chair, and several other positions. So we were honored to be able to have her honored with that award. Yes, so coming up in October is, of course, the Board of Education trustee and municipal elections. So thank you to our long-serving trustees and our new trustees for being present during this challenging period. It feels like the school year is ending on a high note with the things that are in the works. And we look forward to seeing the trustee candidates engaging with parents throughout the entire district on topics of importance as we advance those conversations during the campaign period. Parent engagement is more important than ever and is a strong indicator of how well children find a sense of belonging in schools, which also directly impacts their ability to learn. As you all will probably remember when you were reading to your own children as kids before they could even understand the pictures or the words, that activity built a sense of comfort and safety for them while interacting with books. And that also influences how they feel about reading later on and learning. So we need to create that same sense of positive belonging and connection to ensure that all parents are all students are graduating high school and feel that school is a safe place for them to be their authentic selves. And PACs make that possible. Parents who show up and connect with teachers, staff, support workers, administrators, other parents, we're tuned into the classroom and the school in a positive way. Those relationships are key. So we count on you to do what you can to encourage parents and caregivers to participate in PAC and share how important it is to the learning environment. It's one of the very few things we can influence as parents when budgets are tight. I'd also like to just say thank you to the parents who attend PAC on a regular basis at their own schools, participate in school culture enhancing activities, fundraise for extras, serve on executive, and those that find other ways to connect with schools. It's been a challenging year for them too, and we appreciate all of our parent volunteers. Yeah, so on that note, just thanks everybody for being here, the staff, trustees, parents, rights holders, stakeholders, students. It's been a year of fantastic growth and the best possible that it could be for students and families. So have a great summer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you. And I believe that's all of our partners that are present. I don't see anyone else on the screen. And so I'm going to now welcome our two presenters from the Retired Teachers Association. Would you both come to the microphone? And we're delighted to welcome you. Thank you. And we're looking forward to your presentation.
So good evening, Madam Chairperson, trustees, administrators, other guests. My name is T. Winokas, and this is Chris Nellis, and we are the co-chairs of the Retired Teachers Education Heritage Committee. And we're here tonight because over the course of, I don't know, 16, 17 years, I've been doing various jobs with the Retired Teachers Group and have learned so much about the history of public education in what is now our school district. And so I wrote a book and, and I've got a copy for you. That's why we're here, but I'll just fill it in a little bit. What had happened was we were tasked with doing displays at UNBC. So I made posters, 1910s. Then a couple months later, I did the 1920s. So I did all these posters. And then Prince George had its official 100th birthday. And we were asked to set up a display. So I brought the posters. And I thought, not enough people are reading the posters. And there's a lot of information on them. So I thought our fellow retired teachers, they at least should know about how this district developed in public schooling. So I wrote a series of articles every few months for our newsletters. So then I thought, the public needs to know about this a little bit more. So I adapted the newsletter articles into what became this book. Tasks I worked on with the retired teachers is that we looked at microfilm and microfiche at online of the Prince George citizens
from 1910 onwards, and scoured them for any articles to deal that dealt with education or teachers or students or anything. And then there were a crew of people who retyped these articles. This was, a few decades ago. And then they were made into books, and you have the book. So I was editor of this for a while, so I was reading all about kids in the 1920s and 30s, and in those days, quite often, they would list your marks in the newspaper. So Sammy Smith, his average for the year was 34% or something, and Sammy Smart, his was like 96%. So I got to know a lot of the old time family names, and then I worked on other projects which gave me the information to do this book. So here's a sketch from a student notebook, 1935, that's in our collection, and it's the KGB school. I started off with South Fort George, because everybody knows that little schoolhouse at Lady Tenay Park. And do you know where originally was placed? In South Fort George, Well, if you go down Queensway, there's the big Shaw building, and next door to the Shaw building is their service yard and big spools of cables and things. Where the spools of cables are, next to Thatbridge Lane, is where that little schoolhouse stood. It opened in 1910 and had both Indigenous students and European students in it. And so that was the first school I wrote about. And it wasn't that much longer that it built the second South Fort George schoolhouse in the ridge just behind it. So then I moved on to Central Fort George. So if you're at Spruceland Shopping Center and you look east and a little bit north, that was the main thoroughfare of Central Fort George. And that would have been, again, starting around 1910, a little bit earlier. And the first schoolhouse was on the corner of 2nd and Johnson in today's terms. And then in 1913, they put a second schoolhouse in that was known as the Big Schoolhouse. And that was at pretty well where the current Central Fort George School is. And then they built another schoolhouse and so on. So South Fort George and Central Fort George were named after George III. So we come to Prince George, but that was named after Prince George, the Duke of Kent, who is Queen Elizabeth's uncle. So that was a different story because they contracted to build the first school, but it was 3 little cottages. So if you happen to go to the RCMP station at Victoria between 4th and 5th, the back part of that lot is where these 3 cottages were, and that was the first Prince George School. And that was 1915, and then they built more permanent schools in 1916, and one was at Winnipeg and 7th, sort of where the current Duchess Park is, and the other one was at 15th and Queensway, where the Queensway Towers building is where I used to live. And that building became the high school in a couple of years. It only had 18 students. And the year it opened in 1918 as a high school is the year that the big influenza epidemic came. So school was closed, that became a hospital for a couple of months. Then the influenza epidemic ended and they fumigated the building and Christmas holidays were starting and it went back to being a school. So I thought that was quite interesting. So after the sort of in-town schools in the 1910s, I branched out to the east. And when the Grand Trunk Pacific Railway was being built, they came from the Alberta end, and every 16 kilometers was a station and a station master. And they had a few people move in with families, and these families had kids. They wanted their kids to be educated. And so you had to have back in those days, every school had a board of trustees. So 3 trustees, and they had to be voted in. They had to have a place for the school. They had to hire a teacher. They had to find lodging for the teacher, and they had to have a budget. And so when you come from Alberta to here, every so many kilometers, like I said, along the railway, where they built a school, there was its own board of trustees. And so in the early days, when they had to put up a teacher, everyone wanted that because there was a bit of money involved, but in some cases, the teacher shared the bedroom with the householder and his wife, with maybe a curtain or a blanket hanging in between. And one teacher writes of having canned moose meat for breakfast, canned moose meat for lunch, and canned moose meat for dinner. So conditions were pretty different from the way they became later. Tijon was an early area, about between 1911 and 1913. Their school was a big canvas tent. I mean, it was heavy duty canvas, but it's pretty cold in Tijon. And the tent was the school. And in some of the areas that were railway areas, they used a boxcar, which to me is incredible because you close the doors to keep the heat in and it's pitch black. You open the door so the kids could see their work on the little slate and the cold air comes in. Anyway, so I've got all of that in here. And what had happened was when the teachers came up to this area, they could come by train. So if they were in Vancouver, they would take a steamship to Prince Rupert and get on the Grand Trunk Pacific and come this way. Some people took a steamship to Squamish because the PGE railway had started, and that would bring them to Quesnel. And then from Quesnel, they take either a stagecoach or after 1924, get into a car, and that would bring to Prince George. And other people, of course, would come from, let's say, the Edmonton end, again on the railway. So when a new teacher arrived in a community, they were met by the board of trustees. And I found one that was sort of a little bit different. In 1926, a new teacher, Carlisle Clay, was hired to teach at a school halfway between Prince George and McBride. There would be 32 pupils from grades 1 to 10. Normally, the trustees would meet him at the station. However, the board secretary and his wife were in jail, and the chairman had broken into their house to get the books and was charged with break and enter. So in this case, a school inspector from Prince George had to come out to welcome the teacher. I didn't know if you liked that or not, because it's sort of casting dispersion on honorable trustees, but anyway. So when they built these schools, everybody wanted the school on their property. So there are all kinds of big, Salmon Valley had 7 schools. They all wanted the school in their area, and so they would pick one in the middle, and the teacher would have nobody to talk to for hours. And Chris and I read about one teacher who was so lonely, there were no neighbors. He had a record player, so he'd get up in the middle of the night and put the old gramophone on just so it'd be somebody to talk to or listen to. In World War II, I don't know if you know this or not, but 8,000 Canadian and US troops were stationed in Prince George. So really there was no room. So all of these military people came, they were put up, but a lot of them had wives and children, so they moved into people's houses. So kids were sharing beds and houses with military personnel. And the soldier, they had dances, so these dashing soldiers, maybe they were, maybe they weren't, would attract all the high school girls. So that meant that our local boys would act up a lot because they wanted to get the attention of the girls too. And I don't know if you know it or not, but there were internment camps for Japanese in World War II. There were 5 of them in our school district. They were all sort of toward Tijon and that part of the area. So, but they were for men. There weren't any children or school children there, but that's something to be aware of. Now, there was a new principal for Prince George High School, and his name was Ray Williston. And the school board chair was Harold Moffat. And these 2 guys were dynamite. Nothing was going to stop them. And the military was pulling out, and they looked at Duchess Park, which was a park, and it was sort of crisscrossed with roads And the high school was there, they said, we've got no playing field. I know, we'll close up that road, nobody ever uses it anyway, we'll close up that road, nobody ever uses it. So they had the kids go out and sort of fill these roads in to make a field, and all of a sudden the city said, excuse me, what are you doing? But they left it, and those roads don't even go through today, so. The other thing they did is they talked to the War Assets Commission and said, you've got all these military buildings and boy, could we use them. So one became the board office, which, and they moved it to 6th Avenue in Winnipeg. And 3 of them became the dorms here, because the dorms started in the late 40s. And some were the shops for the high school. And one had been, and then there was a military hospital. And so the city of Prince George took over that hospital, but the old hospital was there. And that became a residence for teachers. So to rent out couples and whatever. And Wendy Herbert's mom and dad lived in one, I don't know if you remember Wendy, but she's an ex-administrator from here. Her parents lived in that, what was hospital. And also just after the war, there was a school called Mount Baldy Elementary, and it was a military base for United States Air Force personnel. But they were taught by Canadian teachers. So these little American kids were taught, started off the day with "Oh Canada," and they had 2 Thanksgivings and so on and so forth. So that's kind of an anomaly. In the spring of 1959, the Prince George Parent-Teacher Council presented Parent-Teacher Time on CKPG Radio every Tuesday at 9 p.m. And the half-hour program explained various aspects of local education through weekly topics. Now, there were hundreds, because each school had its own school board, there were hundreds and hundreds of school boards in the province. And the Department of Education just couldn't handle what was going on. So they hired Max Cameron to do a report. He said, okay, we've got to consolidate these. So Prince George had what became Prince George School District, I think had 22 schools. And the other half of the school district, which was McBride School District, had 15 schools. So there was School District 57 and School District 58, which was McBride. And so the one-room schools ended, and the kids were in these schools with other kids. They had some of them had running water, they had heat, and they had school buses for the first time. So it was quite a switchover when they, in 1946, when they consolidated these school districts. In 1961, there was a Chant report on education, and that's when grade 7 was moved into elementary. Grade 13 was added for high school. French was compulsory in grade 8. High school was not used anymore. It became secondary school. And they had an occupational program offered to the lowest achievers from grades 8 to 10. And the regular kids had 2 streams, academic and vocational. In the 1960s, it got very busy in Prince George because of the pulp mills. And so they were building schools like crazy. And one school plan designed by Alan Greenwell, we've got 7 of these in the district, school stand being one of them, hexagonal gym, and then classrooms are in a loop. And so that was from 1966, 1967, something like that. PGSS came at that time. So many kids were on shift in the 60s, 142 divisions one year, and the school district was not that big. And then the new schools were built, and the next year there were 69 divisions. Teachers were hard to find. So one story from the late 1960s is Dave Eldred was director of elementary school, and he's frantic to get teachers. He needed 34 teachers. School was starting in about 2 or 3 days. So he got a phone call from Vancouver with 2 teachers from Australia that just got off the ship. Said, good, I've been waiting for you to call. Do you know of any other teachers? Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them here. How many? He said, 34. 34. Okay, he hired them all. And so when school started, he was only 3 teachers short. So anyway, School District 57 and 58 amalgamated over a lot of controversy at the time in 1970. And that's sort of where I ended my book. And speaking of endings of books, I have the list of all schools to 1970 and when they opened. And then I've got a bibliography, and I guess that's it. I have to thank the Exploration Place for allowing us to use their photographs. And just for information, the UNBC's Northern Archives and Special Collections have uploaded this book. And they also have uploaded historical memories. They can be viewed in full online. And Chris will be handing you a pamphlet, and the URL addresses are in there. That's it.
Thank you.
And Chris will be coming around, so.
We have just, I'm not sure how many. Oh, you need it. Well, how about we did one there? I think we've got her every- Thank you.
Okay, and Madam Chairperson, here's the book for you guys.
Oh, there you go. I'm sorry. I've lost my mic and everything, but thank you both of you
Very
for bringing this information to us. It's just delightful to know the history of our area, and you can tell it,
about it online, right?
you tell it in a very warm and enjoyable way.
I was
Go
just
ahead.
going to mention a couple of things
Sure,
quickly.
my information's in there.
Take a step.
Go ahead.
So first of all, thank you very much for your support in the past. You may not realize, but we have a collection at Lac des Bois, which is, was given to us the space and the help to reassemble everything when we left where Polaris is now. And it's working out extremely well. We have almost 11,000 items in our collection from schools that have closed through the years, other schools that just find out about us and give us things that they run out of space with or are no longer using, old trophies. Sometimes they're wall photos because they run out of space and they'll give us their older ones. So this brochure sort of shows the kinds of things that is in our collection, and we're always happy to receive more donations. And we also appreciate the donations that come from the school district, from your offices here, including the board minutes. We have all of those that come to us. And we're also always looking for anything that is of educational value, I guess, that comes out of your, like I know there's been reports this year, that one that Joanne was just talking about. I mean, for us to have copies of that would be wonderful, including things that come out of surveys or anything like that. We'd be happy to receive copies of those. Anything, with an educational focus. Even copies of your COVID guidelines. We were thinking we should maybe, that would be something that's historically of interest 10 years from now. So what's this all about? So to have anything of that kind of ilk. I know that we heard there was a special advisor's report on Indigenous students that was put out this year that if we could, somehow obtain copies of these sorts of bits of information. We do have a place that I know is kept here for us to basket, about box, where we can pick up things. So anything you think of can just kind of go into that and it'll get picked up periodically. So yeah, so thank you very much. Also,
We get phone calls from individuals every once in a while, myself or to you, just asking for, sometimes it's the yearbook from 1967 PGSS, or they want a photo, like I had a woman phone from Alberta wanting photos from when her parents went to South Fort George in the 60s. And we actually had them. So, make copies and send them to her. But most of those calls come via your office here. That's the first place that they think of to call when they were asking questions about history of the school district. So thank you so much for passing on those calls to either Tia or myself, so that we're able to help people out when they have these, they seem kind of minor, but for them, it's important to have these things from the past that they can track down. So thank you very much. Any questions?
I just want to thank you both very much for presenting to us again tonight and sharing the history, and thank you for the work you do.
You're very
History is
welcome. We do have a group of 8, there's 8 of us that have been working through the last few years. We broke into separate groups and tried to stay safe, and anyway, so we have been able to continue to work, and we've been continuing to get donations all through that time, so it's.
And we have a party
Well.
next Tuesday.
We're taking a break for the summer too.
Well, you have a wonderful summer, and thank you so much for coming to share with us tonight.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm just going to move us along to, that was very enjoyable to know the history. We have some school district news. It's local news and recent news, so I'm going to ask if there's any trustees who would like to share some of their news for this week. Trustee Thompson, go ahead, Trustee Thompson.
So I'll just be very brief. I had the pleasure of attending the capstone presentations in Pride, and Assistant Superintendent Karpenko was there, and we were both extremely impressed with the students' thoughtful presentations. I mean, some of them were like TED Talks. They were so well done. And you're thinking, this person is just starting their life. Look how good they are. But it was one of those basket full moments. So I just thought I'd mention that.
Oh, thank you very much, Trustee Thompson. Anyone else that has school district news? Trustee Beckery.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to mention that on Monday, I had the opportunity to attend a full-day session called Delcat Language Curriculum. It was at the Ancestors House, and it was a culmination of 2 years of work, very hard work, that had gone on in a very collaborative way. A working group had met 2 times a week, all during the 2 years of the pandemic. And they met for 4 hours each week and have developed the curriculum right from early childhood education right through to grade 12. And the purpose of Monday was to get community input on the curriculum that had been developed. What we liked, what we didn't, what we thought was missing. That was a bit hard, sort of coming from the peripheral, to give that kind of input, but it was surprising how much you could sort of think about and actually contribute. And I think that it's not that long until it comes before the board as a board authorized course. It's very impressive, and so much work has gone into it. And I really congratulate the working group on having developed it to this level. So anyway, I was very glad to be there. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Trustee Beckery. And it sounds like a very interesting day. Trustee Bennett.
Thank you, Chairperson. I had, along with a few other trustees, had the opportunity on June the 9th to tune into the online discussion hosted by our District Student Advisory Council, where they presented their videos and held online discussion. Over 4,000 students and teachers from British Columbia had the opportunity to tune in live and watch this discussion, and the videos, of course, are now both through the school district website and through our district's YouTube channel. But just again, just a huge kudos to our District Student Advisory Council and the partners who came together to make those videos possible. It's a great way to amplify their voice. As well, just, we're at that time of year where there are lots happening in our schools right now, field trips, sports days, and year-end concerts, and just a huge thank you to all of the staff in our buildings, to the parents who volunteer their time. These are truly great experiences for our students. And I know everyone's tired. I know everyone just wants to get to the end of the year. But everyone's digging deep right now and are able to create some great memories to wrap up the school year. So hearing and seeing lots of exciting things happen in our buildings right now.
Thank you very much, Trustee Bennett. Trustee Palalo.
Thank you, Chair. And on the heels of what Trustee Bennett said, last Friday, I attended the Cole Heather Park Community Barbecue put on by the local pack there. And man, it was a fantastic event and really well attended. I think there was a couple hundred people there. They had music, they had dancing. Kids were playing in the playground. The sun was shining. It was fantastic. So big shout out to them. And I just touched base with them yesterday, and they also had a silent auction, and they raised a couple $1,000 as well too with the silent auction and donation. So kudos to them and a job well done. And the other item I wanted to mention is I attended the School District 57 Intersect grant last Thursday, and man, that was powerful. And these kids, a lot of them face really profound challenges. In particular, one gentleman who spoke, who 2 or 3 years ago, he couldn't even come out of his room. And here he was on stage performing for all of us in a rap song where he thanked all his teachers and the support that he had that got him to that point. And it was really emotional. And I just want to send a special shout out to the staff that does amazing work with those kids to get them to the point that they are. So, and the great services that Intersect does along with School District 57 with that program.
Thank you for sharing that, Trustee Palalo. Go ahead. Trustee Mooney.
I was still trying to figure this out. I had the privilege of going to the College Heights Elementary School here and watching these young children perform on stage. It was touching, it was moving, it was emotional. I had the teacher, Dave, send me photographs, a collage of what was going on, but we were unable to show that. But we had the next best thing, we had them right here. So that's all I have to say about that because everybody got to see it. I want to touch on Duchess Park. I spoke to the graduation class there. And you saw these young people. You saw the happiness in their faces. They're through high school, but also you saw the fear because they didn't know what was coming up. And it takes you back when you were there and you understand what they're going through. John McGinnis, I did the Indigenous talk there. I got Pam to talk to. It was an enlightenment. These children worked very hard to get where they are. And it was a struggle. It wasn't easy. I also spoke today to the general graduating class. And I saw the same thing that I saw at Duchess Park. There was glee, there was joy, and there was fear. What I'm going to say is that not so many, because I've only been here a short time, but the board itself and the educators, the teachers, the staff, the support workers, custodians, all had a part in these graduating kids. If it was for them, they wouldn't have graduated. So I want to commend, especially the educators in this room, through your knowledge and experience and fortitude. You work very hard for the kids to reach their goal of graduation. As a grandparent and a former parent, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. I have one more duty to perform today, and it's a very important one because we have 5 leaders, and we have many, many wonderful leaders that have worked so hard in our district for our students, for their members. And today we have to have an opportunity to say and acknowledge the work of Joanne Habke, the president of the Prince George District Teachers Association. And thank you for all the years of work that you have contributed to your employees and to the students of this district. I had quite a few words that I wanted to say here, and I know the time is going along, but Joanne, your advocacy and dedication to the working and learning conditions of your members. Thank you. Your monthly reminders of the importance of their work, the needs of their students, the reminders of their challenges, and the importance of their personal health and wellness, which you spoke again to today. Thank you for these reminders, because we need to keep them at the forefront of our work. And your advocacy helps that cause. As you move forward into the classroom, and I know you're going back, what an adventure for you. It's been a while. And we wish you all the very best. We can't say enough about the commitment and dedication that you brought to the work of this district over the years. So thank you, and all the best in this next year and years ahead. And I also need to make mention of another person that is leading the work of the district, and that is Karen Wong. And Karen has been the president of QP, I always get the number wrong,
3742.
3742. And Karen has worked, I don't know the number of years that she has been the advocate and the leader of her members. But Karen, as you have, Joanne, has committed to supporting her work, her employees, her workers, her members in terms of their working and learning conditions, ensuring that they have all the supports that we need to provide for them. And when she advocates to us, we know that we must be listening on behalf of all of our support workers. So we want to wish Karen a very, very happy retirement. I believe she is retiring, and maybe I'm wrong. Is she returning to work? I'm not sure of what her plan is, but whatever that plan is, we wish her all the very best. And then the person that I want to speak to right now is Andrea Beckett, and she isn't present, but we all know that Andrea has been a constant reminder of the critical role of parents, students, and their rights. And it was her work, along with Jillian Burnett and the DPAC team, that were instrumental in the development and ensuring that we have an appropriate appeal process, one that all can access easily. And so under her leadership and the leadership of the DPAC, they've reached out, as Laura had mentioned today, and have engaged the community in many initiatives that make a difference for our students. So we want to pass our thanks along to Andrea Beckett. And finally, the last person and it's not the least, but I just have to make mention of Harsh Dhaliwal, the president of our district student advisory council. Harsh has been an exceptional role model and student leader. She and Chris Zimmerman, who is the vice president, will be moving on and passing the torch to a very exceptional district student advisory council team that are just waiting to get started. They have led this extremely dedicated group of young leaders, not only in raising the bar for anti-racism, but they've raised the bar and it opened the door for student agency and student voice. And we must not let that go. We must remember that this is a legacy that they have started and we must continue to support. And so She's been an incredible inspiration and example of student agency. And I also want to make mention of Katie Barron, who is also leading us. And Katie always said, when we step out of the way, when we give students voice to make decisions, to design their own learning, incredible things happen. And we can witness that this year. Incredible things have happened. So on behalf of the board, we thank all of these exceptional leaders, Joanne, Karen, Andrea, Harsh, and your leadership team, because without your leadership team, it is a work that we all know how important it is. We're moving the district forward in such a good way. And so all the best in the next chapters of your life. Thank you. And I know our evening is getting longer and longer, and we have much work to do. But at the end of the year, there's so much to celebrate and so much to be grateful for. So I'm going to move right us into the minutes of our previous meetings, and we'll move along quickly. The regular meeting of May 31st. Are there any errors or omissions or changes that need to be noted? Trustee Palello.
Motion to accept the minutes as presented.
Second.
Seconded, Trustee Deckering. All in favor? And those minutes are approved. Let's move on to the record of minutes of regular in-camera meeting of May 30th, special in-camera meetings of May 30th at 4 p.m. and 4:10 p.m., June 6th and 9th of 2022, found on page 14. Are there any errors or omissions? Trustee Bennett moves acceptance, seconded Trustee Thompson, all in favor of acceptance, and those are unanimously accepted. Thank you. Is there any business arising from the minutes? I don't believe there is. And so we're going to move right on to the next item, which is new business, and I'm going to welcome our superintendent, Hyman, to discuss and share the draft framework for enhanced student learning report. Go ahead, Superintendent.
Hadi, Senate Chair, Zanzu, hello, good evening. It is an honor for me to be here tonight to talk about this important work on the unceded ancestral lands of Clayton tonight. I'm going to share my screen. So my presentation tonight is a summary of the Framework for Enhancing Student Learning report that starts on page 16 of the agenda book for this evening's meeting. The Framework for Enhancing Student Learning report is an annual report that we're required to do with the Ministry of Education as per the ministerial order, and you can see M302 on my slides. Each year, a board must prepare and submit to the minister a report completed in accordance with this order between June 30th and September 30th. It talks about the criteria that must be included within that report. And it also talks about ensuring that we are disaggregating our data based on some particular student populations, Indigenous students living on and off reserve, children in youth and care, and students with disabilities and diverse abilities. In addition to ensuring that we are talking about our data with student populations, with the implementation of DRIPA and the action plan of the ministry, and within British Columbia, we must also, whenever possible, use a distinctions-based approach when we're talking about Indigenous people, that being First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. What's very interesting about this report is it must be 10 pages in length. You will notice our report this year is 11 pages in length, but I do have permission to do that because I included a summary of our strategic plan with the actual report this year. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the requirement we have to speak to the engagement we went through with our continuous improvement cycle. And we are required to engage multiple times throughout the year to do a review of our plan, look at our evidence and our data, as well as hear the feedback from our community, our learning communities, around what they would like to see for their learners. You can see that our process was designed to gather feedback from our community on a continuous basis. We wanted to review what was important for students to learn, what's valued in education, and what our priorities should be based on student outcomes. This engagement process provided us with input from over 500 people, and we recorded specific ideas from our staff, students, parents, rights holders, stakeholders, and community at large. Our process included 3 online exchanges, the ideas and thoughts of 2 parent focus group conversations, 3 community focus groups, 1 in the fall, 2 in the spring, 1 review with our Indigenous Education Leadership Table, and 1 review with our senior staff. What I want to point out is we've included in our report this year a summary of who engaged with us in our online process. You can see we had 3 processes, 1 for our fall strategic plan, 1 for our budget consultation, which is critical in the development of our work. We need to ensure that we are aligning our budget to our priorities based on the data. And then we did another strategic plan review in the spring. Our largest participation comes from our parent group, followed by our teacher group. I have some questions that's emerged from this data, and that being, we're seeing some low participation rates from our students, from our rights holders and stakeholders. And my questions and the work we need to do next year is how do we engage our community in a more wholesome way? We did have engagement through our focus groups. However, I do believe we could see more participation. In addition, we utilized an opportunity to survey the Indigenous community as per recommendation in our special advisors report. Our focus was the big question: what are the best ways for us to communicate and engage with you to ensure your voice is heard and you are a part of the success planning for Indigenous children? Tell us how we can support Indigenous children within School District 57 pathway on their pathway to success. We heard from over 253 families in our first attempt of completing this engagement process, which is a good start. When you think about, we have just under 4,000 Indigenous students within School District 57, we have some work to do in terms of engaging and hearing the voice. However, we started the process and we have gathered some very valuable information as a result of that process. In the report, we're required to share our data in 3 categories. The first one being intellectual development, the second one being human and social, and the third one being career development. The first section I want to talk about is our intellectual development. There is an overarching rule within the framework report where we need to report on students who meet or exceed literacy and numeracy expectations for each grade. The measures we're required to use come from the foundation skills assessment, as well as some additional data points from the school district specifically. You can see, and in the presentation, the slides are color, so it's a little bit more exciting than the ones in the book in black and white, that when you look at our reading, our literacy outcomes for grade 4, we have some work to do. When you stand back and you look at a distance, the trend line will slightly go up, but I will say it slightly goes up. The ministry has also asked that we do not include the 2020-2021 FSA data as the main comparator, as the assessment was done at a different time of the year. And across the province, that data seems to stand out as an anomaly. What we've included new this year is looking at the cohort of learners. So what I've presented for this particular report is a comparative of how the students performed in grade 4 on the FSA with the same students' performance in grade 7. So for instance, in the 2017-18 school year, the grade 4s, 65% were meeting expectations for literacy. That group of students, when they were in grade 7, went up by 5% to 70. When you look at all learners for the 2018 year, there was no change, and in fact, it went down by 1%, which statistically would equate to virtually no change. And you'll see the same outcomes for Indigenous learners. What that tells us is when students are identified as having reading struggles with the FSA in grade 4, the interventions that were in place or the strategies we were using to help students hasn't made a large impact on those students by the time they reach grade 7. So we need to look at what we're doing, evaluate that, and see what adjustments we need to make. In addition to the FSA, we've included the benchmark assessment literacy assessment for all grades through 1 through 7. What you'll see here is that the data that's presented is very consistent with the data that comes from the foundation skills assessment. And we see many of our learners below expectations for grade level reading. There's a bit of an anomaly with our grade 2s this year. They seem to be performing the highest. So we, again, have some questions and some deeper dives into the data. We've also included the data from the early years evaluation tool. We call that the I assessment. And this I assessment is completed on students in 5 elementary schools. We consider our primary progress schools in School District 57. And research has shown that the skills in the domains assessed are related to children's literacy development and their success at school. So these domains, awareness of self and environment, social skills and approaches to learning, cognitive skills, language and communication, fine motor and gross motor development, has an impact on their literacy development and their success at school. What's exciting about this data is that you will notice students who were having significant difficulties in these domains was reduced at a great rate for the spring assessment. So for instance, you will see 28 students struggled and had significant difficulty with cognitive skills. In the spring, only 9 maintained having difficulties. You'll notice appropriate development for those skills, meaning would be on track to have strong literacy skills and success at school, doubled in many of those categories. For instance, the cognitive skills, 42 students had appropriate development, 84 by the spring. You'll look at the same data for the fine motor, the gross motor, awareness of self-environment. They all went up, which means strategies and the work that our kindergarten teachers are doing in these schools is making a difference for these learners. The I assessment not only provides us with valuable data, it also provides us with some very good strategies and tools to help support the development. We are also required to report on numeracy. Again, if you stand back and you look, you will see there is a very slight increase, but when you zone in to what those percentages are, it's in the 50s. We also use the comparatives of the cohort data, grade 4s to grade 7s, and you will see once again, consistent with literacy, the interventions and strategies we're using aren't making a difference for those learners. We went further and we chose to get more information, which is looking at a classroom-based assessment, which is the SNAP assessment. And we assess students grade 1s through 8. For the purpose of the report, we chose one of the strands, which is understanding and solving, which is one of the strands of numeracy. Again, you will see very consistent to the FSA, we're seeing the same results. This is new information for us. We have some work to do as we develop the use of these assessments and how it can inform our instruction. This is the very beginning for us, but now we know. This data has just created more questions for us. And the work we want to do going forward is really looking at what schools have demonstrated promising practice in numeracy and how can we replicate it, because it does happen. And how do we shift mindsets around numeracy from mathematics to numeracy? We know that it is changing. We are no longer solving math. We are working in the land of numeracy, which is understanding numbers and applying them as opposed to basic computations. So we talk about, one of the requirements in the report is to also talk about the adjustments that are being made to these strategies, and you heard Joanne Hapke talk about those. What we've done is chosen to amplify and make adjustments to existing strategies. So again, really looking at our professional development, adding grad coach time, and that's something I'll talk about a little bit further on, and really looking at providing not only professional development for classroom teachers, non-enrolling support teachers, but also educational assistants who are supporting struggling learners on the day-to-day basis. For numeracy, really focus on that, that data dialogue, moving from information to actions, looking at our universal designs for learning differentiation, looking at how we administer the SNAP, student numeracy and assessment practice, and identifying areas that require more support, as well as supporting that has already formed. It was strategy last year, was to develop a numeracy advisory committee. So it's to support that. That's why we've adjusted that strategy and engage in really focused numeracy inquiry projects to help support moving numeracy forward. You will know that numeracy is a focus for School District 57 next year. Grade to grade transitions are required to be reported on an annual basis as well. We are pleased with what we saw last year with our students transitioning from a grade 11 to 12. We had made that a goal in our strategic plan to really focus on that. So we have more questions as a result of this. We saw almost 10% more students stay in school from 11 to 12. That is a reason to celebrate. However, our next steps with that would be, how do we ensure they're achieving a dogwood? Not only staying to complete grade 12, but complete grade 12 with a dogwood. And you can see the adjustments to the strategies that have been made and are put into the framework. Two that I want to highlight is to expand the district partnership with the YMCA alternate suspension program for schools. That is a pilot we did with the YMCA last year, where students, instead of going home for a suspension, were working with the YMCA program, where they were working on skills, had an opportunity to catch up on schoolwork, and we are expanding that program next year based on extremely high success rates. And again, using the grad coach data and the equity learning profile to learn the education story of Indigenous students. We know relationships matter. The second area of focus in the report needs to be on the human and social development. The outcomes are students will feel welcome, safe, and connected to their school.
Could I just interrupt just for a moment? I think Trustee Bennett may have a question. Would you like to have
Do you want
a question now?
questions now or at the end?
Could we do them at the end? Because I've got a good flow going. Thank you.
I don't want to ruin that.
I'll pick it back up again.
Hold your question.
I'll pick it up.
Go ahead.
So we know that students feeling welcome, safe, and connected to their school are indicators of success. And we've been talking about the student learning survey and the data that has not changed over a significant amount of time. We do consider COVID as a factor within this data, but we also have some strategies that we're working on to help see this data improve. We know that less than 30% of our students don't feel safe. More than 30% of our students, don't feel safe at school. I've talked about this. That's not okay. I don't want that to be my child. We don't want that to be your children. We know that less than 50% of our students feel like they belong. And the work I think our district is doing around creating that sense of belonging through our commitments to truth and reconciliation, through our commitments of indigenizing and decolonizing our system, through our commitments of increasing our mental health supports, through our commitments of increasing our equity, we should see students beginning to feel as though they belong. And again, students don't feel welcome across the board in our school at about 50%. So we're asking lots of questions, and our schools are doing a tremendous amount of work as they look at the cultures of their buildings and how do we create those environments. COVID has not been our friend as we do this work. But you know, we heard Deepak talk tonight. We're seeing the work of DSAC and the commitment of our staff to really, really create opportunities for students to feel welcomed and belong. What we chose to do this year is do a bit of a deeper dive, and we looked at an additional assessment, which is the middle years development, or the middle years instrument, the MDI. And instead of assessing grades 4s and 7s, because as you know, student learning surveys, foundation skills assessment, we chose to look at our 5s to 8s. And what's really critical about that grade 8 data is we know a lot of our students struggle when they transition into secondary school. The MDI data gives us detailed information school by school on the assets that help promote positive development and well-being. What you'll see here is the assets, and the MDI, the MDI uses 4 domains to identify as assets: adult relationships, after-school activities, peer relationships, and nutrition and sleep. You'll see for our grade 5 students, they're in the 70% for relationships and activities. 57% of our grade 5 students have nutrition and sleep as an asset towards their success. And when you go into this data, and the link is there in this report, and it will be electronic, you can go in and you can see the specific data around nutrition and sleep for our grade 5s. And it's alarming. When we look at our grade 8, that number drops even more. 45% of our students have the asset of nutrition and sleep. And I will tell you, sleep is a huge concern for students and is a worry of mine. And I know the educators in the room will agree, our students are not getting enough sleep. We have some work to do. We know this information. What are our next steps? In addition to looking at the assets, we looked at the grade 8 experience for our students. And this is very interesting evidence, as it talks about children's school experiences improves the ability to both create and cultivate school environments that are safe, caring, and supportive. We look at the academic self-concepts, so students seeing themselves as learners, seeing themselves as having learning abilities, academic abilities. We look at the school climate, the tone of the school, and the school belonging. And again, you will see this evidence is very consistent to what we saw in the student learning survey for our grade 7s. So as our students are transitioning into grade 8, that's not changing. If anything, it's going down. And we know through our work this year and the work we've done with grad coaches and looking at stories of learning and using that street data, students fall off track in grade 8. We track the students who are at risk of not graduating, and we can see their success up to grade 7, and something happens, and it happens at that grade 8 and 9 level. So this provides us with the evidence that the school experience for grade 8 students is a concern. More analysis is required so that we can put in the appropriate school and district-based supports to help our students be more successful. So I talked about our review and our adjustments through that conversation, but we are required to report on it. So I've added it there. Lots of this information shifts. So the new course on identity at the grade 8 level, it said develop. We've adjusted that to say implement. So there are no new additional strategies. They're just changing from developing to implementing, or implementing to continuing. Career development is the third area we are required to report on. And the outcomes there are students will graduate with career options and choice, and students will have the core competencies to achieve their life goals. We had a strategy in our strategic plan to have our students utilize the My Blueprint education planning tool to start looking at their pathways before they enter high school, so that they can think about the courses they want to take and start seeing themselves as a successful person when they move into that new setting. This is a request we heard from our First Nations loud and clear and of our community through our strategic plan engagement session. They wanted students to have more life skills. They wanted students to start seeing themselves as learners earlier. They wanted us to be talking about graduation with students before they enter high school. They said, you wait too long. You wait until grade 10 when they enter the grad program. By then it's too late. And based on the information that we've collected around our students, we know that's accurate, because by grade 8, we're losing our kids. So we made a shift and we had a goal. And you can see we have many students utilizing the My Blueprint tool. And this is as of the end of May. We have additional students using that planner. So our grade 6 and 7s, we have 40% at the end of May. I anticipate that number will be closer to 60%. So 60% of our students are using the My Blueprint education planner before they go to high school to start thinking about their interests, their passions. It doesn't say this is my career path, because who knows that when they're 12 years old? We don't know that when we're 25 years old. But what it does is it helps them honor their passions, their interests, and gets them curious about what's possible. And you'll see with our grade 11s, we have 76%, grade 10, 66%. So this is becoming a tool that we're using in order to help our students see themselves as successful. We're really proud of our CTC program, and we celebrate that partnership with CNC. And we're working to develop a new program with technology dual credit with both CNC and UMBC for the 22-23 school year. And we are hopeful that we will be able to offer that. Will run in line with our semester system. So not only looking at the trades in the form that we know with carpentry, electricians, plumbing, heavy duty mechanics, etc., but moving into that world of technology, which kids, they speak that language. So how do we provide the same kind of opportunities in that land? You can see we have students accessing careers and trade programs. But when we have a school district that populates 13,000 students, just about 5,000 of them in the grade 8 to 12, if you think about each one of our grades is about 1,000 students. These numbers are low. They're really low. So the questions we have, are these not what kids are interested in? Do we not have enough opportunities? What's happening and how do we provide more? So as we mentioned, we're looking at some additional programs for our students. We are required in this category to talk about a 5-year completion rate. And you'll see there, when you stand back, there is a trend upward. But the numbers are still low with that trend. We are making gains, small gains. We need to accelerate those small gains. You will see I have linked the How Are We Doing report within this framework, and that How Are We Doing report is full of information on graduation. One of the things that was pointed out to us from the First Nations Indigenous Education Outcomes team at the Ministry of Education is we are one of the districts that has a declining adult dogwood completion. Our grad rate, our 5-year grad rate, hasn't gone down as a result. It's gone up slightly, or is stayed the same, which means we have more students graduating with the regular dogwood as opposed to an adult dogwood. So what used to be adult dogwood, and the bars here, adult dogwood and regular dogwood, we're seeing fewer adult dogwoods, which means our regular dogwoods would be going up to maintain what we're seeing across the board, which is very good news because the regular dogwood fits that options and choices criteria. That leads us to think about what courses our students are taking. And this is also information that's available in the How Are We Doing report. And we know that many courses, although meet graduation requirements, limit student access to post-secondary options. The 2 courses that provide students with the most options are the completion of the English 12 or English First Peoples 12 and the completion of Pre-Calculus 11. So we did a bit of a dive into what courses are our kids taking. And you'll see here, the Workplace Math 10, although meets graduation requirements, does not lead you to Pre-Calculus 11. 50% of Indigenous students are in Workplace Math 10. Yet only 20% of our non-Indigenous students are in Workplace Math 10. That's not parity. There's a large gap. And there's an overrepresentation of Indigenous students in that class. When you only have 30% of the population Indigenous, you should not see that number higher than 30%. Foundations in Pre-Calc 11, or sorry, Pre-Calc 10 is the option for grade 10. 25% of Indigenous students take that class, yet 62% of the non-Indigenous students take that class. That's huge. We have big questions. And then when you look at the Pre-Calc 11 class, which we know is one of the main prerequisites, 22% of Indigenous students are taking Pre-Calc 11, 43% of non-Indigenous students are taking Pre-Calc 11. So again, we're not seeing equity with those courses. In addition to that data, we started an initiative this year through the Indigenous Education Department, which is Indigenous Grad Coaches. And this was something that was implemented in our high schools, and teachers were assigned blocks to support Indigenous students reaching graduation. For this year, we focused on our grade 10s, 11s, and 12s, with a primary focus on our grade 12s. Students were assessed based on their course completion, based on that story we learned of them, and were categorized red, yellow, green. Red meaning at risk of not graduating. green meaning on track, yellow meaning they're on the bubble. It could go either way. If you look at our grade 10s in the fall, we had 72 students not on track for where they should be for grade 10. In the spring, we had 50. 20 more students worked to achieve what they needed to throughout that year to get on track. You look to our grade 11s in green, we had 144 students on track in grade 11. By spring, we had 175, an increase of 31 more students, Indigenous students on track to graduate. And I think what I really want to celebrate is the tremendous work done with our grade 12 students. A decrease of 60 students in the red, meaning not on track at all. So we had 133 grade 12s, didn't look like they were going to make it. By spring, we had 73. That's still 73 kids not graduating. It's still not okay, but it's an improvement. We saw 38 more students get to that place of being on track with 22 students, in addition to 22 students saying, I want the extra year. So the strategy that's been adjusted for this is we have more grad coach time in schools to help support this work, to see if we can increase those numbers even more, or in the case of the red and yellow, decrease. We're also required to report on the secondary transitions, students going to post-secondary school. The first chart is students who go after 1 year. The second chart is students who go after 3 years. We see about 50% of our kids go to post-secondary. These are only post-secondary institutions in British Columbia. So we don't have the data on those who leave British Columbia. 50%. I want to know what those students are doing. Maybe they're taking a gap year. Maybe they're traveling. Maybe they're going to work. Because post-secondary isn't for everybody. And there are lots of employment opportunities for students, and not everybody needs to go to university. But is that what they wanted to do or not? That's the question. We do see more students attending after 3 years. And finally, I talked about our adjustments. We will have some additional documents that will be linked to this framework report, one being our strategic plan, implementation plan, the annual budget. We are required to show how our budget aligns to the strategies, and some work that we're working on right now with finance is looking at our strategies and how we addressed it through the budgeting process in a very explicit way. I'm excited to do that work. The special advisors work plan will be linked in here because much of the work that we talk about in this framework is also spoken of in the special advisors work report. The local education agreements. The focus on Indigenous graduation is a huge component of our local education agreements. And they will be linked to this document as well for people to be able to read, to see how we're meeting the commitments through those agreements. And then finally, the department operation plans. The departments being human resources, technology, communication, inclusive ed, Indigenous ed, and curriculum. So you will have that information. And finally, the last part is how are we going to continue on with our continuous improvement cycle? And you will see we've committed to the same plan that we had this year. This is new practice in School District 57, and we want to continue to grow it in this way. So we've kept the same timeline. It worked. And my hope is that as this becomes a part of our culture, we'll see more and more participation. Thank you. That's
Thank you very much, Deputy Superintendent. I think we have a question from Trustee Bennett. Go ahead, Trustee Bennett. Oh,
Can I stop sharing?
I think I'm falling asleep here.
Cindy, stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And I probably could have a bajillion questions for our superintendent, but I'm also cognizant that we have kind of a very lengthy agenda ahead of us this evening. So I've kind of tried to narrow it down to my top 3. Would you like them one at a time, or could I list them all and I'll let you?
Let's do one at a time.
Okay, so I'm going back to so in the board book, it's on page 19 of 190, looking at the 2022 benchmark assessment for literacy. So I know previous boards have made decisions to invest into early literacy. So I was honestly hoping that we would see more on track as we got into the older grades. So I guess my question is, how can either we as a board or as a district further work to address the on track numbers of reading levels for kids, because, if I'm reading this right, right now, we are seeing less than half of our kids, and in some cases, like our grade 6 year, 34% of kids reading at reading level. So what do we need to do to address this problem?
Boy, oops, sorry, Mark. There you are.
I actually want to speak to two things around this assessment. One being the standard for this assessment is very, very high. This is gold star assessment in terms of the highest level of achievement we would expect for our kids in those grade levels. The second thing I want to talk to you a little bit about is we need to be really cautious when we're looking at this data. I participated in a call yesterday with other superintendents across the province, and we're all seeing the same thing. And that is that our data is very low for the past 2 years, in particularly this year. And although as we don't want to keep saying COVID had an impact, COVID had learning impacts. There is no way we cannot say that. So what I suggest we do for this year, and what we're going to continue to do, is provide balanced literacy, professional development, and really focus on it. Where the focus goes, the energy flows. Schools are working very, very hard for literacy intervention. They're working very hard at understanding what it is that is creating the challenge for learners to learn to read. It's different for every single student, and creating very specific intervention in those areas. I think we need to give this a little bit of time. This is our start year with this, so we'll see where it goes next year.
Go ahead, just a minute.
Sorry, I turned my mic off.
Okay.
And thanks, Fred, and I appreciate that. And I think that it's important, like, BCSTA has formed a group to look at how COVID has impacted the district over 2 years, and the impact of students is a big part of that work. So I think this data is going to be looked at very closely about what the learning impacts to students has been, as well as both the mental health and stress impacts on our families and on our employees. So I think there's a lot of work ahead that way. I guess I'll ask my other two, because I think I can ask quicker. So one is, when I'm looking at the adjustments, what are we doing now moving forward? Where I notice the gap is specific adjustments relating to both youth and care and students with diverse needs. Again, if we're looking at the results, those numbers are categories that are significantly underperforming compared to looking at the student body as a whole. So I'm just wondering if the district has specific plans to address both youth and care and our students with diverse needs.
Yeah, thank you.
And the other question is, I'm noticing a drop off again between grade 7 and grade 10 results. So I'm just wondering again around what might be being done or could be done to help with that elementary to secondary transition.
So the first one I want to address is the youth and care, and thank you for bringing that up, because I did not mention that. This is something that is obviously concerned. It's a second year. I meet monthly with the Ministry of Children and Families, and through that we have identified that the education components of the care plans really aren't robust. They're being written in isolation, and there isn't a team approach. So some work that I'm doing with MCFD right now is to create appropriate education plans as part of the care plans. Right now, the care plan had really been focused on attendance, getting kids to school, etc. But knowing that children in care and the impacts the trauma has as a result of going into care is significantly impacting the learning of those students. And how can we support them in a different way? So right now, the work that we're doing is very much with MCFD, Ministry of Children and Family Development, on developing appropriate educational components of those care plans and specific attention on those. And how do those two organizations, those ministries, work together to support our children in care? So that's that one. In terms of the grade 10 numeracy assessments and literacy assessments, you are correct. There is a drop. In the case of a numeracy, when we talk to students about their experience with the numeracy 10 assessment, they will tell you, I have no idea how to write that assessment, because they know how to write math tests. They don't know how to write numeracy assessments. The assessments are not based on a course. They're based on the competency learning standards, the ability to do something with the information that they've learned. So that tells us we have work to do in the secondary schools in developing that competency of applying the learning, not just knowing something. And that is work that we will do through our professional development, our plan with our secondary schools.
Thank you very much, Trustee Milton, go ahead. 1 second here.
Cindy, I've read your report forwards and backwards and up and down. I have come to the conclusion that last year was a complete year for the students. Very difficult from the 2 previous years to have a match. You know, I've always said I want that bar raised high. I want the students to pass with, you know, the read to the grade 12 level and all this kind of stuff. But looking through this with the data that we have, I am encouraged. This will be the 2nd year that we're going to have a full year. And that will be the standard that we're going to have to relook at. This is just a preliminary. I encourage you to raise that bar, make these kids work for what they are going to get. And at the end, they'll thank you. I thank you now.
Thanks, Milton. Are there any other questions regarding the framework? Go ahead, Trustee Malala.
Yeah, and I think just following up on that point, I found this very comprehensive, very thorough, very detailed. And I believe that this sort of information at this level, this deep detail, has rarely been provided in this district. So I applaud the fact that we are discussing it and we're transparent. It does focus, we have work in front of us, and the superintendent was quite candid with that. And maybe just speak to the fact that, just following up on Trustee Mahoney's point, the fact that it's going to take time. This is why we have plans that are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It's going to take time, and I think it's important for parents and public to understand that. You just can't turn things around that quickly. And but in order to do it, you need comprehensive planning and continually assessing the data. And I think we're off to a great start.
Thank you, Trustee Malala. Any further comment on the report? And go ahead, Superintendent.
Just in closing, I want to acknowledge that this evidence is hard to read, and it can feel somewhat deflating for us as educators. But I need to commend the work of this district and the work that is happening. We are working hard, really hard, and it is noticed and it is acknowledged, and this will take time. But I don't want this to leave us feeling despair. We know the information, we know what we need to do, and I believe we need to continue on the path that has been charted for us. It's our map. The strategic plan is our map, and I think we've got a good map. We just need to continue the work that we're doing, and I think it is really important that everybody knows we see the hard work that's happening in this district, and it is acknowledged and it is appreciated. And I agree, Trustee Mahoney, we're on the right track. It's going to take time. The bar is set high, and we're going to keep going.
Thank you, Superintendent. And I too echo the importance of this work that you have presented for us. And it is a lot. There's a lot of information here for people to digest. We've had the opportunity to hear it a couple of times now. And each time we understand that the story behind the data is the story that we need to be paying attention to, and the questions that we need to continue to ask. That is a reality. But we also need to thank the teachers and support staff and all that are working so hard to bring our students up to the standard where they are successful, because it is all about success. And so thank you very much for providing this report to us. And I don't believe there are any other questions. Trustee Bennett, go ahead.
Just more of a point for interest, and I don't know if trustees saw it in an email that came out to trustees. All of these special reports are going to be reviewed by representatives from other districts. So the ministry has protocol for trustees to sit and review other districts' special reports as well. So if you're interested, you have that email from the CSTA
Yes.
on your email. If you love this kind of data work.
Well, it is important, and I do believe it's educators though that are involved more in that screening. but
There'll be a trustee on every
be a
committee as well.
trustee. Okay, that's good to know. Good. Thank you for sharing that, Trustee Bennett. And it is important. Go ahead. Now, nothing further. Okay, and thank you again, Cindy. We're getting down to a place where we have Shannon has been sitting here waiting so patiently. And so I'm going to move us right into the next agenda item. And then I'm going to ask if we can have a quick break. But I'm going to move right through to Trustee Coelho and to your report, Trustee Coelho.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I'll move the recommendation that the report of the Education Programs and Planning Committee meeting held June 19th be received.
Second, Trustee Thompson. Go ahead, Trustee Coelho.
Just a brief update. It's in your handout that was provided to all trustees before the meeting. We had a really good presentation from Julie Fisher, the fine arts teacher. She led us through a presentation called Indigenous Music Through Seasonal Round. This is a teaching resource featuring local Indigenous musicians created by SD 57 and the Collaborative Learning Team. And it really had great success. And in fact, we were talking about Kim Gauthier, and who actually performed, I know, at ceremonies yesterday in the park. She benefited from it, and a few other artists. But really how it's a great resource for teachers to use in their classrooms, because we heard from teachers who said we need authentic resources to teach the strategic plan goal of Indigenous education. And it really has been a success, and it continues to be a success. And I know she's got great plans to continue this work in the years to come. And then we had a presentation from Jennifer Piggin, who is the Vice Principal of Indigenous Education. And it's what Trustee Beckering talked about in District News. This framework of proposed the Celtic language curriculum that was developed in conjunction with our friends in School District number 28, south of us in Quesnel. And she presented that, and as Trustee Beckering reported, they did some more work on that in the day-long seminar. And I know that will be, as Trustee Beckering mentioned, will come to the board here very soon. And we're looking forward to implementing that program within the district. And then we had a strategic plan update. The superintendent reviewed the updates, goals, and strategies and objectives for year 1 and 2. And as you had mentioned, and what we just heard tonight, the committee also got the framework for enhanced student learning presentation that we just heard from a superintendent. So that was our meeting on June 14th. And if there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Any questions? Hearing none. Go right ahead, Trustee Coelho.
So as you had mentioned, the principal from Spruce Land is here, Shannon Danes, and I'm wondering. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, your report.
The report.
The report has been moved and seconded. All in favor of receiving the report of Trustee Coelho, and that is unanimous. Thank you. And welcome.
She ran away.
Oh,
No,
there
there
she
she
comes.
comes.
I thought you were going to leave on us.
You stayed for the whole thing and then we'll leave.
Thank you. Welcome.
So we welcome Shannon and Assistant Superintendent Kat Manhas. We're going to talk about the journey that Spruce Side Traditional has been on for the last year or so. Go ahead, Shannon.
Hello, my name is Shannon Danes. I'm the principal of Spruce Land.
Can you turn your mic on?
Here we are.
It was on.
Okay.
Good evening, my name is Shannon Dames. I'm the principal of Spruce Land Traditional Elementary School. I would like to thank Superintendent Hyden for that about math. I texted my child who's going into grade 10. They are registered for foundations and pre-calculus 10. Thank you for that as a parent. While we're waiting. I will also say that I just came back from Alberta, and as a visitor to everywhere that I've ever lived, I really it's beautiful in Alberta, but Prince George is so beautiful, and I'm very grateful to be doing my work and learning and raising my children on this beautiful traditional territory that's with the Chinese people. Anyways, some of you have heard this before, so thank you for listening to this again. I'm just going to review a little bit. I'm going to go back in time. I started at Spruce Lawn Traditional Elementary School in 2020. Is that right? In March, right before COVID hit. And so I haven't really had what we would call a normal experience at the school. But I asked immediately what the idea of a traditional school was. I was really concerned that I didn't have a solid understanding of what this would be. And so I reached out to previous principals and other staff members that I know because I wanted to be able to make sure that I held true to the ideology of that type of a learning environment. And this kind of started the process that we've gone through over the last year and a half. I went to, like I said, some of the other previous principals, and then I approached Cindy Hagen, our superintendent, and I just said to her that I have some questions about the validity of this type of model in a modern context. And I just had some questions about how this was going, and we agreed that it was worth looking into. And so Superintendent Hagen, sorry, I'm stumbling. She presented some information to the trustees, and it was decided at that time, I'm going to read this now, that the Board of Education directs the acting superintendent, at that time the superintendent, to form a choice management committee as per policy 6172.2, establishment of choice programs in schools, to review the philosophical, organizational, and or curricular uniqueness, need, and primary objectives of Spruce Lawn Traditional School. So at that time, we were tasked basically to review the ideology and the appropriateness of our school in this modern context. Thank you. And so from that directive, we pulled out 4 major perspectives or fundamental ideas that we were going to look into. The first being that when the proposals were made in 1998 for choice schools, the presentations were required to indicate how that school would be unique. In order to be considered a choice school, it has to offer something that other schools didn't have. And so the first question that we pulled out was, are we still unique? Do we still offer something different, something at Spruce Lawn Traditional that is not offered in another school? The second, and possibly the biggest one as it went through, was, do we still meet the needs of our community? Are we doing what traditional schools are expected to be doing? And finally, how does this fit in with truth and reconciliation? So originally, as you can see, there were 12 features of the traditional school that made it unique in 1998. And I have highlighted number 5, the dress code, because if you take a look at them, I don't want to read them for everyone. I know you have a long evening, but it is the only one feature of the 12 that we still do differently than any other school in the district. Many of the things in the list are have been that everybody does based on the new curriculum and reporting orders, etc. So things that were really great at the time, and if you look at this list, there's really wonderful ideas, they're actually not uncommon to schools. Like, for example, a shared vision. Well, it's very common for schools to have shared visions, and teachers and staff members to have shared visions in school now. So not that any of the things on this list are necessarily inappropriate, but they just are not unique to the traditional school. So, considering that that one thing is the only thing that makes us unique, we decided to investigate quite early whether or not the uniform was important to various stakeholders in our community. And so we did a number of surveys. We did have parent-teacher interviews in various forums this year, at the beginning of this year. We had an actual polling station in our building for that. We had teachers reach out to their parents and families. We also had an online survey to determine whether or not parents valued the uniform. And interestingly, 49% of parents said they did value the uniform and think it was important for the school, and 51% parents said they did not. We also surveyed the staff, and 42% of our staff did value the uniform and 58% did not. And finally, we surveyed the students, and unsurprisingly to the staff, only 33% of our students found that the uniform was an important part of their day-to-day life at the school. So the second focus was, are we actually meeting the needs of our families right now? And what does that look like for us? So who are our families? First of all, this current school year, we have 286 students. 135 of those students identify as being Indigenous, and we have 62 designated students. I didn't put this in here, and I'll mention it in a second, but well, I'll mention it now. When I got there 2 years ago, we had 350 students. So our projection for next year is 265 students. So the population of the school will have decreased almost 100 students in the 2 years that I've been there. Next year, our population of Indigenous students is not decreasing very much, considering the rest of the population decrease, and we will have 46 designated students. So we do have a very diverse population, and we have students in attendance whose families are from every continent on the planet except for Oceania. So in order to determine whether or not we were meeting the needs of our community, we needed to ask them for their input. So in June of last year, after we were given permission and the directive from the trustees, we did an online survey, a thought exchange. And the question we asked is, what is the one most important thing about attending the traditional choice school? And at that time, we only had 12 respondents. And we recognized that that wasn't very good. So in September, we resubmitted the same question, and this time we had 90 respondents. So keeping in mind that when we say respondents, it's not just of our 285 students that we had 90 people respond, 90 sets of parents responded. So that's of our 200 families. We also did the uniform survey, as I mentioned, in November. And then in April, we met as a committee monthly, and we determined that one of the most important things for us was communication with our families. That if nothing else came of this process, that we would have more open communication and input from our families. And so at some point in March, we decided at our meeting that we were going to divvy up our entire school list. That's how I know there are 200 families in our school. And every staff member took 3 to 5 families that they had a personal connection with and contacted those families directly. We did not make contact with all 200 families, but we did our best to do so on the playground, but by the phone, text, also all manner of methods to get a hold of people. And we had decided that we got better at asking questions. Instead of asking what they valued about the traditional choice school, we started asking questions about what they actually valued in education to determine whether or not we were meeting their needs and the needs of their students. And the first question we asked is, why did you send your kids to Spruceland? Why did you keep your students there? And what would you like to see moving forward? And these were the top 5 responses from our families, and the size indicates how often the response was given. So the number one thing that families valued from our school was that it's a very supportive school. We provide academic support, social emotional support, friendship supports. We have as much support in our building as any building in the district, and it's something that we're really proud of, that we address the needs of the whole child. And that is something that parents recognize and valued about our school. The second part is about community. Spruceland Traditional, before I went there, I knew that they had incredible community activities and events. Christmas, Halloween, the end of the year, they have a carnival, and they're known for that. And so the community piece begins in the school and it spills out into outside time too. And that is definitely something that the families value. And when you see values on the screen, that is kind of a virtue. So one of the factors for the original traditional school was that they had 10 virtues that we acknowledge and teach and students learn throughout the year. But that's also not very different than other schools. We also have a matrix that other schools often have that the schools focus on in teaching values and virtues too as well. Open communication is very valued, as well as the relationships that students have with each other, with the staff, that families have with their staff school. And so these are the top 5 things that families valued about their child's educational experience. Interestingly, from the first question, we thought the first question was going to be more of an icebreaker, but it gave us some of the most valuable information of the entire process. The first one is that 45% of our students and families that responded send their kids to Spruceland because it is what they perceive to be their catchment area. Even though we are a choice school, the entire city is our catchment, they live within walking distance of the school, and it is for convenience sake that they send their children to Spruceland. The 24% that's other is things like my husband attended the school when he was a kid. We have friends whose children attend, and they say wonderful things about the school, those types of things. So we have a large number of people who send their children to Spruceland because of the cultural events and those types of things. Can you see it? Yeah. 17% of our families send their children to Spruceland Traditional Choice School because they do not want to attend their catchment school. And finally, only 14% of our families send their children to our school because it is the traditional school. So this gave us a lot of information about how the traditional school was meeting the needs of our families. So moving into that, I'm not going to give you a big lecture on traditional schools, but I've done a little research, and in the 1990s in British Columbia, there was actually a lot of research done on traditional schools. So I'm thinking that's when the model was really first coming into existence. I'm going to read this quote to you because it's something that stuck out to me. The traditional school model has raised the profile and appeal of authoritarian, competitive, and normative pedagogical approaches. Its challenges to the curriculum have destabilized district commitment to engage students in discussions about equity issues in public schools. This is a quote from research that was done in 1990. Yeah, me too. The next piece of research that I looked at was done in 1998, which was the same year that our traditional school was established. Traditional schools serve like-minded parents to seek refuge from the challenges of public schools. The traditional school seems to differ from other public schools in their explicit design around issues of discipline, family values, and the implementation of uniform policies and implicit Christian religious values. These factors may allow for greater cultural homogeneity and come at the cost of, sorry, I can't read my screen or that with pluralism and the equity that are at the heart of public education. So these two quotes and this research from these two different organizations really spoke to me because I believe that the population of our school, those families outside maybe of those 14% of families, are children who deserve equity in their education And we need to move away from cultural homogeneity and all of the things that we discuss regularly in the presentation that we had today. This research alone really reaffirmed that for our group and the committee. So based on that definition of a traditional school and those understandings of kind of how traditional school works, what is the ideology of the traditional school? Are we doing what we're expected to be doing as a traditional school? Traditional schools have a commitment to individual student success. Okay. An emphasis on formalized decorum through uniforms, formalized manners such as cohesive greetings for adults, and teacher-centered delivery of instructions to students who are the receivers of information. So that's the expectation. At Spruceland Traditional Elementary School, you will not see this in any classroom in our building. Spruceland Traditional Elementary School has a commitment way before I got there to dealing with complex social issues, the diversity that occurs in all Canadian schools. And that there cannot just be a focus on individual success. We have a wider social obligation to bring together diverse values and experiences and teaching children what it means to live in a contemporary society. And we strive towards student-centered learning in the building. So we're not behaving the way a traditional school would be expected to behave. And finally, I just pulled this out. I really won't read this to you because this is our work that we've all been living in the last couple of years. But according to our strategic plan, our district plan for year 1 and 2 goals is to have enhanced trauma-informed and resilience approaches in our school. And I'm going to say that the traditional school model feels very colonized and antiquated in some ways. And so I don't feel that it is in line in ideology with our strategic plan. So what does this all mean? Based on those 4 factors, are we unique? No. We do things almost exactly the same way other schools in our district do. Do we meet the needs of our families? Yes, but not in doing the things that traditional schools are expected to do. We meet the needs of our families when we don't behave the way a traditional school behaves. Are we doing what traditional schools are expected to be doing? No, we don't do any of the things that are traditional except for wear a uniform and sing O Canada every morning. And according to Truth and Reconciliation, does the traditional model seem to fit in with this forward movement? No. So moving forward as a committee, and I would like to also say that we met with staff regularly and we met with PAC monthly to discuss these issues as well, because our whole goal was transparency and communication with our community. We decided that we would like to retain our commitment. Whatever happens, whatever decisions are made, the most important things to our community, to our staff, to our students, to our parents and our families is to retain our commitment to our community, retain our commitment to supporting students as whole children and learners, to equity, inclusivity, and the arts. And perhaps, I want to say that one thing that could be considered moving forward is only a change of name and not in practice at all. But perhaps we are more suited to something like Spruceland Community School of Choice with an arts focus.
Those would be the recommendations.
Would you like us to talk about recommendations?
Yes, I think that would be appropriate at this point.
Okay. So we have 3 recommendations and they're very simple. Because based on these recommendations, they will allow us to retain the identity that we have in the building without changing very much at all. And remain a choice program. So the first recommendation is that the Board of Education remove the word traditional from Spruceland Elementary School to align with the current educational practice of the school. The second recommendation is that the school remain a choice program with a focus on the community and the arts. And finally, that the board engage in a process with community to establish a new name for the school that reflects those things.
Thank you. What our normal process would be a member of the board would bring forward that recommendation. We would second it, and then you could speak to the rationale, and then we could have a further discussion
Okay.
around it. So could I have one member to actually move the recommendation? Trustee Thompson, you will move the recommendation that's before us. Okay, and may I have a seconder? Trustee Beckery. And so I have a mover and a seconder. And so I'd like you to carry on, Shannon, with your rationale.
I think the presentation was the rationale.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I
we should
know,
have moved it first.
Okay, if she wishes to speak any further, then and the board can ask any questions.
Well, I will just give you a little bit more information that might help you with this. And when we met as a committee initially, we did include staff, QP members, PGDTA, administration, assistant superintendent, students, and parents. And the committee has changed a little bit over time, but what we found ourselves coming back to over and over again was that everyone in the building, all the families, the students, the staff members, from the custodians to the administration, believes deeply in the work that happens in that building. And it is focused solely on meeting the needs of our community and moving forward with equity. And that was confirmed every step of the way. So what we're really, the rationale here is that we would really like the identity of the school, the perception of the school, the imaging of the school, the branding of the school to represent the actual practice of the school. Yeah, without actually changing the work, we're still moving forward, we're still growing and learning and changing as we go, but to actually reflect our dedication to our community and to equity.
Thank you. Thank you. Trustee Bennett. Oh, Trustee Mahoney first and then Trustee Bennett. Go ahead.
What were the three things that you mentioned you would like changed?
We would like to take the word traditional out of the name of the school.
It's in the rationale. Trustee Mahoney. It's in the
Oh, yeah,
recommendation.
okay, thanks.
I can say it again though. We would like to remain a choice program, but with a focus on community and the arts. That is a focus that we already currently have. And that we would like the board to engage in a process with our community to establish a new name for the school.
So that recommendation has been moved and seconded. And so it's open for discussion. Did you have anything further you wanted to speak to, Trustee Mahoney, before I bring Trustee Bennett on?
Go ahead. Go ahead and bring Tim on and I'll.
Okay, then I have the speakers list. Trustee Bennett first, and then Trustee Beckery, and then Trustee Weber.
Thank you very much. And again, what I kind of understood from the presentation is, regardless of the decision made tonight, school's gonna look the same September 2022 than it does June 2022. So I guess my only question is, where did the committee land on uniforms for September? Because it seems to be a polarized topic of it.
Thank you. What we have committed to, and from the very beginning, was that there would be zero change as a result of this process for the 2022-23 school year. That we're hoping that if there were changes made and any decisions that families would need to make about the education of their children, that we would have some firmer answers by the online transfer process, oh my goodness, in February. So we've committed to our families that whatever happens this next school year will remain the same in terms of uniform and everything, and that they would have plenty of notice about changes that are going to be made, and then they would be implemented in the 2023-24 year.
I just want to add one thing about the uniform. Everything that Principal Dane says is true, except that she doesn't enforce the uniform when a child wears an orange shirt to school to support Indigenous education. That's what's happening from this year, but yeah, that's not part of the uniform mandate.
Thank you.
So,
I have a follow-up from Trustee Bennett. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to say something about uniforms too, is that we actually have a hard time with uniforms. So it is difficult. We actually clothe children daily with uniforms.
Thank you. Go ahead, trustee Bennett.
Just as a follow-up, sorry.
Oh, I think I just lost you. Yeah.
So just as a follow-up, then if the name is changing, will there then be a new uniform for everyone for September? And is that then a cost that will be transferred down to the families, or would that be a cost that is absorbed within the district, or are we just leaving the current uniform until?
For September, the uniform would stay the same.
Okay, correct.
And then we didn't presume so much to make assumptions about what would happen with the decision-making process after that. But for September, everything will stay the same.
Thank you very much, trustee Bennett. Trustee Beckery. Just 1 second, I'll just turn the mic on.
Thank you, Chair. I'm feeling really confident. The consultation that's happened and the length of time you've taken to reach your recommendation. So I'm all in favor of being in support of the recommendation.
Thank you, trustee Beckery. Trustee Weber. Did I hold on? I will just give you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for filling us in and being excited about possible name change. I am in support of the recommendation. I do have a concern though. I don't have the slide in front of me, so I apologize if I'm not saying it correctly. I do notice that there was 14% of families, so those 14% of families that send their children to the school for traditional purposes. If you change the name, if you take the uniforms away, how are you supporting those families still maintaining it at traditional school if you change the name?
Well, there's a couple of pieces to that. First of all, they will have a year to decide. Like there are many multiple pieces to this. The second piece is that many of those people who identify as really valuing the traditional school, they've moved through the school system, and most of those kids are leaving now the school in and of itself. So you'll see next year, if we pull families again, that percentage would go down quite a bit too, because their kids are in grade 7 now and moving on. So since I've been in the school, there has not been one family in the last 2.5 years that has brought their children to Spruce Lawn Traditional Elementary School because it is a traditional school. They have either been looking for something else other than their catchment school, or they live within walking distance and it's convenience. So the population of the people valuing the traditional school is decreasing yearly. I think that is evidenced by the fact that over 100 kids have, there's a decrease of 100 students over the last 2 years, is that this idea of a traditional school isn't valued by our community very much anymore. We have people who, when they understand that it is a traditional school, are not interested in coming. We also have staff. It is very difficult sometimes to find staff because of the ideology of the traditional school. But having said that, how will we support families is that the practice in the school itself will not need to change, because we have not practiced as a traditional school in years. So again, this practice of the school did not come in with me. This was in place for years to meet the needs of the families that are in the buildings. So the families would not actually experience anything different other than the name of the school.
I think I'll add, and this is just a hypothesis, but I think that even the 300 and some odd kids that it was a few years ago, I don't think that, and I'm just, I'm hypothesizing here. I believe that Spruce Lawn Traditional School was a place for kids to get their students into Dutchess Park. And all of a sudden, when the catchment changed, kids went back to their catchment schools.
Yes.
So I think that a large decrease of the numbers was for that reason and not for any reasons around traditional schooling. I'm hypothesizing, but I think that that's probably part of it.
Trustee Weber, did you have a follow-up? Trustee Mahoney.
I can't speak against this because I think it's a good idea. How's the community, your feeling on the community for these changes?
I feel strongly that the community will be supportive because we have been so open about the process the entire time. We have not received any questions or comments of concern about what was happening. We first started advertising this in June of last year, and I didn't ever even get really questions at that point. And because we focused so purposefully on communication with our families about what we were trying to do just to determine what the value was, I think families feel like they're having input into it. So the next part of this is, we also worked with Dr. Dustin Louis. This was part of our project with Dr. Dustin Louis, and he helped us come up with some ideas around communicating with families. I think the next step will be continuing to involve families on what the changes will look like for them. So I guess this kind of comes back to your question as well, Trustee Weber, is that how do we support this? Well, we wouldn't make autocratic decisions about what this will look like moving forward. Again, I don't believe there would be very much change, but I think it's really valuable and important that if we do make changes and when things are moving forward, that we do include our community in the decision-making process and make sure that they understand that their input is valued.
Okay, next question is, you're talking about a new name. Do you have any names in mind?
I think we like to keep Spurs Land. It is something that our families and our students and our staff connect to. I think we would like to keep the choice school piece, but we also are very interested in the idea of a community school and actually advertising what we do. So we have Big Brothers and Big Sisters before and after school care. We have Strong Start. We have a community schools coordinator that does after school programming for our students. We have, pre-COVID, been very connected with the two seniors centers that are around our school. And yeah, Aim High, we're connected obviously with a lot of different organizations in town that support our children. We would like to advertise that and make that a focus of what we're doing moving forward, so that families understand that that is part of what their children will be participating in school.
Very good. The arts program, I'm 100% behind you there. Earlier on, I was talking with Frank.
I deny it.
Okay. The John McGinnis School is, to me, going through the same process. We're going to advertise on what good work they do. And you have my full support on this.
Thank you, Trustee Mahoney. Thank you. Are there any other speakers, Trustee Palolo?
I'll be brief because I know we've got quite a bit of agenda in front of us, but I strongly support this recommendation. And I would have to agree with Assistant Superintendent Matt Hass. I think the decrease in enrollment has a lot to do with catchment changes that this board made, and to address other challenges. And likely the fact that you're right, that the current practice of the school, I believe, doesn't reflect, or the name doesn't reflect what's actually happening there. And I think a history lesson too, but I'm not correct, that the traditional model was actually at another school in the district that actually brought to that community. So that neighborhood. So, and that was done a while ago. So who knows even if that community really was receptive to the idea, it was just brought there. So yeah, I totally applaud the process and the engagement. And I definitely agree that this is where the district is going. This is in line with our strategic plan, and I believe in line with the community.
Thank you, Trustee Palolo. Trustee Weber, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. This might be directed to Superintendent Sims. If this was approved and the name was to be changed, our budget, we just approved and we had to cut a lot of money. How are we going to find the funds financially to completely change the name and do an overhaul of the school?
Go ahead, Trustee Superintendent.
As mentioned by Ms. Daines, any changes to the school wouldn't be until the 23-24 school year. So we would have a year to do some planning around that work, as well as if it needs to be a budget consideration, we would have the opportunity at that time to do it.
Thank you, Superintendent. Are there any other comments? If not, I'll just add one final and the work you've done over the last year and a half or so, Shannon, with your community speaks loudly to the importance of this recommendation and the importance of moving forward. And so I fully support all three of the aspects of your recommendation. And I believe that if there's no further discussion, Darlene, go ahead. You had something to offer.
We're just wondering if we can add an effective date
to this recommendation so that we're not having to pull traditional off the building right away.
I think what I'm understanding, if I could just respond, that the word that would be all involved in the three. But if you want to put a date on the removal of traditional, that would probably tie into the actual last, that the board engage in a process with the community to establish a new name for the school. So until that engagement process took place, the name of the school would remain the same. That's, am I correct in my thinking, Ms. Daines?
I think so.
Okay, so it would not necessarily mean that we should date that. However, they all tie together. Does that make sense to you, Darlene? Just because I know how you're thinking, and it's important that we don't trap ourselves into something that might require us to take an action that wasn't intended. Did you want to speak to that, Secretary Treasurer? Go ahead.
I think it's all right because I think the motion was made as one motion.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, Trustee Bennett, did you wish?
I was just going to propose an amendment.
Okay, and so I believe that this is one motion with 3 steps in it. And so it's been moved and seconded. I would ask now for the board to vote all in favor of the recommendation as presented. And that is unanimous. And I want to thank you, Shannon, for your work. It's incredible. And for the work of your school. And we know it's an exceptional school. Thank you very, very much. Did you want to- Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm just going to go back. All right, and so we've now come to the conclusion of our number, where are we at? in our
10.
agenda?
10.
We just have our management and finance committee report. I'm going to suggest a 5-minute break, and then we will begin with management and finance, and we'll move forward with the rest of the evening. Go ahead. 5 minutes, be back at 25 after.
Right? People were optimistic about that. Yeah.
No, I'm gonna be right on.
Yeah.
No questions.
I guess I just speakers.
I got
Let's
full
call
water here
this
for
the meeting back to order. And we just have the item number 11, Management and Finance Committee, and I'm going to turn this to Trustee Bennett for your report. And
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I move that the report of the Management and Finance Committee meeting held June 13th, 2022 be received.
seconder, please.
Oh,
Trustee Thompson.
Thank you. For the most part, the report is as presented. I would like to highlight item B, this presentation of the Select Standing Committee. I had the opportunity to represent the board on June 20th to present to the Select Standing Committee on Finance and Government Services. At that point, our presentation focused on we were allowed to talk about 3 priorities in our 5 minutes. So we did talk about the need for sustainable funding to particularly address the inflationary costs, the importance of ensuring that our rural education is properly funded, and the need for increased capital dollars. I did sneak a 4th item in there around meals programs, and the 5 minutes went incredibly quick and had a bunch of questions about the inflationary costs and our meals programs. And with that, as I said, the report that's submitted, I guess the other highlight is around the district's support of transporting students in Prince George, grades 6 and 7, down to Clay Lake Tenay Memorial Park for National Indigenous Day, and to help with transportation in Mackenzie for the Cloud Lake celebration.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Trustee Bennett? Hearing none, the report of Management Finance Committee meeting has been moved to second on June 13th. Be received and be moved and seconded. All in favor of the recommendation, and that is unanimous. Now we can move right along to Ed Services and Trustee Thompson, and your committee report is on a handout. Go ahead, Trustee Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. So recommendation that the report of the Education Services Committee meeting held on June 6th, 2022 be received.
Seconder, please. Trustee Bennett. Go ahead, Trustee Thompson.
Okay. The Education Services Committee met on June 6th, 2022. The meeting's agenda included the following topics. Minutes of the previous meeting, which were approved as presented. The 2023-2024 5-year major capital plan. The 5-year major capital plan was presented by the Secretary Treasurer and General Manager of Capital Projects. Ms. Patterson and Mr. Weston responded to questions from the committee members, and the committee recommended that the plan be presented to the Board of Education and is included in this evening's agenda. The committee also recommended that the board write a letter to the Ministry of Education and Childcare, copied to MLA Mike Morris, requesting funding for the demolition of Mackenzie Elementary School. And I believe the last item on the agenda that evening was the Shasta Kelly Road Secondary School Capital Project. The Director of Facility Services provided a verbal update on the Shasta Kelly Road Secondary Capital Project, advising that the wet spring has delayed the completion of the outside work on sidewalks, sports fields, landscaping, fencing, paving, and other major projects. Mr. Palzer responded to questions from the committee.
Thank you, Trustee Thompson. Just a question to Trustee Thompson. The committee letter to the Ministry of Education requesting funding for demolition. Maybe this would be through you to the Secretary Treasurer. Have we done this? Go ahead. Just. Oh, I think I have speakers on. There you are. Oh, no, there we go.
This has not been before the board, so
That's what I
this
thought.
would need to be voted on by the board, and right now would be a good opportunity to do so.
So I'm going to turn this back to, once we have passed through your report, trustee Thompson, I'm going to ask that you make the recommendation that the board write a letter to the Minister of Education as in.
As a separate motion.
As a separate motion, please. So I'm going to, are there any further questions regarding trustee Thompson's report? Hearing none, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor of receipt of the report? And that is being unanimously accepted. And we now move to, could you please move that recommendation from the committee?
Yes, I'd like to recommend that the committee, the board, I'm sorry, that the board write a letter to the Ministry of Education and Childcare, copied to MLA Mike Morris, requesting funding for the demolition of Mackenzie Elementary School.
Could I have a seconder for that recommendation? Trustee Mahoney, did you wish to speak to that recommendation?
Only to say that this building has been a thorn in the side of the district for a long time, and the cost has gone up exponentially every year that we haven't been able to do it. So I think it's incumbent upon us to seek the funds to do it. It's a danger to the community. It needs to come down.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on this recommendation? Trustee Weber, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I am in total agreement with this. We have met many families that want to see this come down. The kids in the community are vandalizing it. Sirens are going off constantly. The cops are spending more and more time there than they are on actual emergencies. So Minister Whiteside needs to understand that this is important and we need to get the funds to take this down.
Thank you very much, Trustee Weber. Trustee Mahoney.
I just have a comment, a question. I agree that it has to come down. Quicker the better. In Smithers, what they did with one building there that they wanted to demolish, they turned it over to the fire department. The fire department cleaned it out in one evening as an exercise. How would that work for this one? I'm just asking a question here.
I think I'm going to ask our Secretary Treasurer to respond to that. I kind of don't think it's going to work. Go ahead, Secretary Treasurer.
So there are some things that the fire department and the police department can do in the building prior to its demolition, and we have talked to the community about that. One of our concerns is any of the hazardous materials. So we would need to transport and make sure that we remediate the hazardous materials so that nobody is impacted.
Any further, Trustee Mahoney?
No, I'm good, thanks.
Okay, so we have a recommendation before the board that the board write a letter to the Minister of Education and Childcare, copied to MLA Mike Morris, requesting funding for the demolition of Mackenzie Elementary Secondary School. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Thank you very much, Trustee Thompson. Is there any? Yes, and you now have another item to address, the capital budget.
All right, so I have another recommendation. Oh, sorry, hold on.
Oh, my apologies. Yes.
Okay, recommendation that the 2023-2024 5-year major capital plan submission be approved as presented.
Seconder, please, Trustee Polillo. Go ahead, Trustee Thompson.
The Ministry of Education requires that school districts prepare 5-year capital plans. The district's 2023-24 major capital plan must be submitted to the ministry by June 30th, 2022. I don't know why there's 2021 in there, but
Me either.
and must contain the approved board resolution. The 2022-2023 5-year capital plan again addresses capacity challenges through the replacement project at DP Todd Secondary School. The submission once again includes demolition of the closed Mackenzie Elementary School. Included in the submission are 3 additional projects which contemplate the addition of 4 classrooms, a daycare, and a multi-purpose room at each of Malaspina Elementary School, Edgewood Elementary School, Springwood Elementary School.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions? Go ahead, Secretary Treasurer. Watch here.
Thank you. I have shared my screen so that everybody can see. In consultation with the ministry, they requested that we pull out the addition to DP Todd. So we had initially, when we prepared the report and took it to the committee, just included the line number 4 in the first section, where it's an addition and renovation to increase the capacity at DP Todd for 66 million. We had included that as a sub request of the replacement because our first wish is of course the full replacement. However, the ministry staff has advised us that we should be including it in the additions as well. So you'll see in this report that there's a DP Todd secondary addition and a DP Todd secondary full replacement, so that the ministry has the opportunity to choose which way they fund the school district. The other item that's on there again is the Mackenzie Elementary demolition. And we have had this on our submission for probably the last 5 years. And we were not successful in receiving funding for it in the last year, so it's back on the request.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. Have Trustee Bennett, please.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I guess my question through to the Secretary Treasurer is, would the and again, it would be great to have a brand new building, but would the $66 million renovation and addition meet the needs of that building?
Secretary Treasurer.
I believe that it would take a little bit of a staging process to get it completed. We would need to juggle things and do things in sections, but it would change the look and feel of the school to be more in line with the learning undertaken today, rather than the structure as it sits now. There are a lot of classroom spaces within the building currently that don't meet the current standards, and this would allow us to bring those to the current standards.
Thank you, Trustee Bennett. Go ahead.
I guess where I was going with that is, it would be then my hope, and again, while it would be great to have a replacement building, we could get our 4 items under addition. We get those 3 elementary additions, DB Todd and Mackenzie Elementary, and save the taxpayers $12.12 million by hoping the ministry would address items 1 to 4 and demolition. So I guess I would just hope that if the ministry came back and said, hey, we're going to build a DP Todd, then there might be an opportunity for a conversation there about we can meet the needs with a $66 million expansion, and then we also have an opportunity to fund our elementary schools that need growth. And it seems $100 million for DP Todd would be great, but then I feel that then we're also going to miss out on the additional expansions that need to be done to meet the needs that are growing elementary schools, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Trustee Bennett. Just a question then from as the chair, are you suggesting that we don't include the replacement increased capacity of $101,000?
Million,
I should say.
I
forgot those 408s at the end. Go ahead.
I mean,
Okay, my fault.
and I mean, I think we need to continue to advocate for the money for DP Todd. I think a better use of taxpayer dollars is to look at the addition and renovation that's going to the need. But if there's indication from staff that the ministry is looking at, I guess I honestly, I see it, but I understand the committee's recommendations to put it there. I feel that there's a better ask for capital dollars than a $100 million school, but I won't vote against it, but I do feel that there's better advocacy opportunities to better meet the needs of our district.
Thank you, Trustee Bennett. Trustee Mahoney.
Tim, you totally confused me. The way I look at this is if the government's gonna give you money either way, take it and run. If they want to give us $101 million, have at it. And we can always find some way to slide some money into the other thing.
I don't think you can.
Actually, you can. No, actually, you can. No. If
Well, I
they
did-
give
I still- I
funding
still
for
go-
that project, it's for
I
that
still-
project and that project
I
alone.
still say, if the government's gonna give you money either way, just grab it, run, have a nice day. You probably could use it. But I'm in favor of this.
Thank you, trustee Mahoney. The ask, I understand, and I understand the confusion as well. But the fact that they're going to look at the full, and we have been down this road many times. And when it comes to asking for a full replacement, government hasn't been too excited to move forward, particularly if they know there's another option where they could offer us a much less at $66 million. I've got tax money on my mind. If nobody needs to know about that. So,
That's another story.
yeah, that's a story nobody needs to know. Okay, so we have a capital project. Oh, any further discussion? Trustee Palello, I apologize for making light of this very, very important issue.
Yeah, I guess just maybe kind of to respond to trustee Bennett, I understand where you're going with your logic, and I think this is about options. I think it's healthy to give the option, and who knows, it's more than likely and I think it's important to note that since I've been on this board, we've requested, I think this is the 4th or 5th time we've been at it, and I applaud, I guess, the perseverance of this board to continue because it's much needed. And I know that was a priority when I came on this board, was to see some sort of announcement around debutante secretary. But I think it's an option, and I think the ministry has given us some advice here, so I think we should heed that advice. And this submission, I'm comfortable with it, and we'll have my support moving forward. And I think the other important thing is the longer that we don't get this, as we know, the price increases. And when we first went at this with a full replacement, I believe it was around the neighborhood of around what the renovation is now, around the 67.
I think it was 73.
73, and now the renovation is 66.5 million. So yeah, it just, I guess, makes a point of the urgency to get this project hopefully approved and move forward with it.
Thank you, trustee Palello. Any further discussion on this recommendation around the 23-24 5-year major capital plan submission be approved as presented? Hearing nothing further, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, trustee Thompson. And that concludes the Education Services Committee report. And now we're going to move on to the very, very busy part of our meeting, which is policy and governance, and the committee report by trustee Becker.
Thank you, Chair. So I guess here we go, everyone. The committee report for policy and governance, June 2022. The recommendation that the report of the Policy and Governance Committee meeting held on June 7th, 2022 be received.
Senator trustee Thompson. Go ahead, trustee Becker.
Thank you. The meeting agenda items were board governance, which appears in this evening's agenda, role of the board, which appears in the agenda, role of the trustee, also in tonight's agenda, role of the superintendent, again in the agenda, bylaw 2, indemnification, again in the agenda, bylaw 3, elections, in the agenda, policy and delegation of authority in tonight's agenda. That's my report.
Yes, thank you. Trustee Beckering has the recommendation that the Policy and Governance Committee meeting held on June 7th, 2022 be received. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of receipt? And that is unanimous. Go ahead, trustee Becker.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I need to do a bit of a preamble. The following agenda up to 181 page is a sort of a culmination of 2 years of waiting to be able to bring these all forward. So I just really wanted to thank especially our Secretary Treasurer, Darlene, and Diane Nygaard for the incredible amount of work to edit all of this data, to compile it and put it into this binder format. And I thank you so much for all your work. So I guess also I need to recognize that at the time when we first approved the policies, Trustee Weber and Trustee Mahoney were not on our board. So I'm hoping that we can keep you caught up as we move through this next part of the agenda. And please feel free to ask questions. We'll try and answer as best we can. If we have a rescind of an old policy in the recommendation, we'll deal with that first and then move on to approving the new policies. So I'll start right away with board governance. The recommendation, and this is on page 33, that recommendation 31, sorry, I have I've already thrown up. Okay, that the Board of Education rescind policy 1120, access to the board. So, and policy 8230, trustee remuneration and expenses, and bylaw 1, A, bylaw to provide for the organization and operation of the board effective June 22nd, 2022. That's recommendation.
Okay, so the recommendation to rescind has been moved, seconded, Trustee Thompson. I'm just wondering if this is the appropriate process. Yes, thank you. Go ahead, Trustee Bennett. I would agree.
I believe in this case, it would be my point of order that I think we need to address all these together.
Yes.
Because in theory, if we rescind the first one and then don't approve the second one, we now have no operational guidelines for the board. So I think we need to tackle this all together as one. And it will make us get out of here slightly faster.
And I would,
I second that motion.
I absolutely concur.
So
So
is my recommendation, Chair.
Trustee
Yeah.
Bennett, or Trustee Beckering, if you would read the full recommendation.
I did read the full
No,
recommendation.
Each one.
As presented.
You have to do all of the four of them. And then we will have a seconder, we will discuss, and then we will vote.
Okay, that the Board of Education rescind policy 1120, access to the board, policy 8230, trustee remuneration and expenses, and bylaw number 1, A, bylaw to provide for the organization and operation of the board effective June 22nd, 2022, and that the Board of Education approves in principle policy 1, foundational statements, policy 7, board operations, policy 8, board committees, and policy 9, board representatives, and distributes them for 60 days to stakeholders and right holders for input, and that the following ad hoc committees convened by the board during the 21-22 school year continue and report to the advisory committee in alignment with policy 8, board committees. Ad hoc language planning committee, ad hoc long range planning use committee, and ad hoc committee on trustee remuneration. And that the following working group convened by the policy and governance committee during the 21-22 school year continue and report to the advisory committee in alignment with policy 8, board committee. The whistleblower policy development working group. I'm not reading all of the rationale.
Thank you, Trustee Beckering. We have the recommendation read, and I need a seconder for the complete recommendation, Trustee Colello. Now, for discussion on the recommendation.
And so I am sure that all trustees have read very carefully each of the policies that are being rescinded and the bylaw 1, as well as the policies 1, policy 7, and policy 8. It is important for trustees to know that bylaw 1 has been rewritten with sections incorporated into policy 7, board operations, and policy 8, board committees that have been revised. So policy bylaw 1 has been incorporated fairly accurately in these 3 policies. That's a note that I have. I also have a comment that I would like to make, that the Ad hoc Language Planning Committee, the Ad hoc Long Range Facility Use Committee, and the Ad hoc Committee on Trustee Remuneration, I believe there is some editing that may be needed to the wording in those 3 committees. However, that would need to be a recommendation to bring the dates and whatnot up to current, because there is some language in there that does need to be changed or edited. Further discussion, trustee Barrett.
Sorry, I might. Thank you very much, Chair. And again, recognizing the recommendation tonight is really to approve a principle and then distribute. There will be an opportunity to look at the policies again. My question, and I'm looking at policy 7 around the page 57. Policy 7, regulation 3, which I really wish was in place this evening with the cap to board meeting times. My question is, and it's more, I don't remember the conversation around the ability to extend with unanimous agreement of trustees present. I recognize that it needs to be, it probably should be greater than just the majority of the board, especially where we have trustees who, the point of moving the board meetings earlier was so that people could travel and get home in daylight. My only question with unanimous is there's very few things at the corporate board table that require unanimous consent. And one would be, and really that's just passing, what I can think of is passing the bylaws in one evening. So I'm just wondering, I can't remember the rationale behind unanimous, and I'm wondering if it would be more appropriate to do 2/3. That would align more with past bylaws and other pressing decisions of the board. And that's probably our secretary treasurer.
Are you just going to amend or recommend that the wording be amended?
It's a question I have now, and again, whether it's an amendment now or we can address it after the 60 days. It's just very little of our business requires unanimous, and I don't necessarily know if extending a meeting is something that should require that level of vote.
Any comments? Well, we actually, unless it becomes an amendment to change the wording, I think
That
at
was
this point.
why I asked the question as Secretary Treasurer, so
Yeah.
you might remember the reason why.
Go ahead, Secretary Treasurer.
I don't believe there is a specific reason why it's unanimous. I think 2/3 majority would be sufficient.
Would it be an agreement of those people present that we just
Friendly amendment.
with the friendly amendment that we revise that statement to 2/3 majority? It can be, remember, this is going out in principle, so, and it can come back and be debated again. Go ahead, Secretary Treasurer.
I believe that some of that wording came over from bylaw 1 when committee meetings were extended beyond the initial 2 hours.
Right. Trustee Brevin, go ahead. No, I need to remove some speakers.
Thank you, Chair. I think with the word unanimous, you're asking to extend our meetings with people that are here, they should all be in agreement to stay. So I think even if we have 2/3 and we have a couple people that don't agree to stay, you're not disrespecting their time and not allowing them to have those feelings and those, that representation and putting pressure on them to stay. So I'm fine with the unanimous, I'm fine with changing it to whatever the board wants, but I mean, we also need to think about the respect of everybody sitting at this table in inclement weather or, you know, late at night. Just a suggestion.
Is it, trustee Bennett, I'm going to leave it in your hands to make a recommendation.
At this point, Chairperson, again, this is all new to us, like the meeting structure is new to us. Being able to be out in 2 hours is new to us.
Especially this board.
Honestly, I'm okay with trying it, and it's going out for feedback for a reason.
Yeah.
Let's revisit it. And the 60 days doesn't include summer, so we'll be looking at, the new board will be looking at this November, December. They can have a conversation at that time.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. Because you turned us to this page, so I'm going to just draw everybody's attention to 3.3, which is new. And it's important that you recognize it. Same page, 57.
Okay.
Policy 7, 3.3, all meetings of the board will be recorded and recordings will be maintained for a period of 12 months. Recordings of regular and special public meetings will be posted on the website. This is new. It wasn't there initially, and I think it's important for trustees to be aware that this is being added. Go ahead, trustee, secretary treasurer.
The reason that we added this was because one of the tenets is that the policies actually incorporate motions of the board, and one of the motions of the board recently is that all meetings of the board will be recorded. So we tried to incorporate that into the actual policy.
Great, thank you. That was just a point of information. Are there any other questions regarding the information in the recommendation? Any further discussion? Go ahead, trustee Palao. Oh, and I have noted our trustee Mahoney. Trustee Palao first and then trustee.
I guess another important information piece to policy 7, page 59 is the development of the regular public meeting agenda and the new committee structure, which is important that currently now we have 4 committees. Moving forward, there will be 3 committees. One essentially dealing with business and operations, an ad hoc committee, and then an education committee as well too. So I think that's important to note as well.
Speaking of policy 8.
Yeah.
Policy 8, okay. Are there any further comments that wish to be made at this time? Trustee Zachary, just give me a second. There you are.
Thanks, Chair. I think we do need to turn to policy 8 and the descriptions of the committees. I think that's important to cover.
Thank you. And I'm just.
Those are page 72
okay.
and 73 and 74.
Trustee Mahoney, you had a point you wanted to raise.
Yes, I'm still back on page 57. The 12-month period to keep the records, is that long enough, do you think?
That's the, sorry.
You're just gonna let me start.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah, I got too many speakers in
Just yell,
in the queue. There we are.
Currently, the board passed a motion to record and maintain public board meetings for 12 months. So we tried to incorporate that 12 months. As well.
Okay, we can always give that a whirl and do it. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, we still keep the minutes, just not the recording.
Is what?
You keep the minutes, not the recording.
Oh, you keep the minutes?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we always keep the minutes.
Okay, I sit here now for you myself.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And now we're back to trustee Becker.
Thank you. So page 72, the advisory committee, I think we should read the shaded areas. For powers and duties, the committee may convene working groups for the purpose of researching and preparing information about a particular issue or topic to bring forward to the board through this committee. There's been some adjustment with meeting times. There'll be 4 to 6 on Tuesday of each month. That the following rights holders and stakeholder groups, instead of partner groups, will be invited just to keep us up to date in our language. Indigenous Education Advisory Committee, so that's the name change. And rights holder and stakeholder again, and the Board Education Committee. I think we've all read the purpose. We've changed the Aboriginal to Indigenous and special to inclusive. And the Business Committee. So the bylaw development and review, corporate sponsorships, detailed budget review, employee accommodation, and as we read, illegal and audit, property and capital planning, and the rest have been made deleted, but not probably been added to admin procedures.
They become part of the discussion at the advisory committee.
Oh,
I think,
okay,
yeah,
thank you.
I think that's a very good question and very good point. So go ahead, Secretary Treasurer.
So if people look on page 72, it says the purpose of the committee is to provide perspective and advice to trustees on matters referred to it by the board, staff, or by a rights holder or stakeholder group. Matters may be related to any area of the district's operation or board policy. So items which had previously been included in the business committee have been struck in order that they may come to the advisory committee.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions regarding policy 8? I do believe that clarifies a few of those items. Just going to go back to one other point that was on policy 7, and that is on page 62, and it's important, I think, for the public to know that the formal, informal presentations that were part of our policy, which one was it now? Access to the board, 1120, have been revised, and you'll see that the remarks, that public remarks have been moved to following the adjournment of every regularly scheduled public board meeting to provide opportunity for members of the public to make comment. That is a change to our current practice. And so it's important that we're aware, that the public is aware that that's a change here. Are there any other comments that anyone wants to make regarding policy set, the policies in front of us? And as I said, if you wanted, from my notes, when I reviewed the ad hoc committees, which are all on page 62, no, sorry, where are the ad hoc committees?
Are you looking at the terms of reference?
Yes, I am.
So the terms of reference are on page 88, and I've made a note that in the reporting structure, they would report up through the advisory committee rather than up through each of the committees that are noted on them. And then we will look at the timing.
Right. And so the some of the policies that are named in the recommendations probably will need to be revised.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. And I think that's it. Those were the things I noticed.
Huge learning curve, Chair.
It is a big learning curve. And I actually applaud Trustee Weber and Trustee Mahoney for their patience, because this will be a lot of change for you. We have had an opportunity to look at these initially in several years ago, even though there are some changes. We're more familiar with the policies as they've been restructured. And so your questions will be welcomed. Go ahead, Trustee Becker. The floor is yours.
Well, I think if there's no further discussion, we can move forward on that recommendation, that full page of recommendation, right down to policy
So we're going to move to rescind
We send
policy
policy 1120 and policy 8230
And final one.
and bylaw 1.
and then we're going to approve in principle.
Mhm. Policy 1, policy 7, policy 8, policy 9. And the following ad hoc committees will continue in alignment with policy 8. The ad hoc language, ad hoc long range facility, ad hoc committee on trustee remuneration. And the following working group, the whistleblower policy in alignment with policy 8.
So this policy, this recommendation has been moved and seconded. All in favor of the recommendation? And that is unanimous. Thank you, trustee Becker. Very efficient.
Now,
Moving on.
moving on. to 74. Pardon me? Page 94. 94, roll of the board.
60 pages.
Oh, I felt that.
So, roll of the board, that the Board of Education rescind policy 1160, roll of the board effective June 22nd, 2022, and the Board of Education approves in principle, policy 2, roll of the board, policy 5, roll of the board chair, and policy 6, roll of the vice chair, and distributes them for 60 days to stakeholders and rights holders for input.
Motion has, the recommendation has been moved, seconded, please. Trustee Palello, go ahead, trustee Becker.
So I think going through the pages that are with this recommendation are right up to page, I believe, yes. So, roll of the vice chair.
I think it's page 114.
Yeah, 114, yeah. So those are the pages we're working on right now. So rescinding policy 1160, the role of the board. And bringing in the policy that we've rewritten.
So trustee Becker, I guess the question that would be asked is, has the role of the board, which was developed not very long ago, has it changed in any significant way in policy 1160 to the policy 2? Could you speak to that?
I just know that 5.8 is annually review the school district's organization chart prepared by the superintendent and assume responsibility for granting approval regarding the addition or removal of positions. And we've already exercised that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Trustee Secretary Treasurer, if you wish to speak to this.
And I want to remind everybody that's watching, all two people, that that we actually had this at Policy and Governance, and one of the discussions at Policy and Governance was that there were very few changes between policy 1160 role of the board and policy 2 role of the board. Anything that is a significant change is highlighted in gray at this point. So you can see trustee Beckering outlined the change to 5.8. And there's another addition on 14 under selected responsibilities to approve the local education agreement with local First Nations. And then the other major changes were regarding the trustee work, the board's work plan in Appendix B.
Yeah. So if you can turn to 107, the board's annual work plan, there's outlines for September right through to June. So some of the highlighted gray are things that we'll be doing in each of the months, and the ones with the lines through, we're no longer doing that at that time.
Thank you, trustee Beckering. Are there any questions about the changes that have been highlighted? And remembering again, this is going out for approval in principle, which means that it's operational at this time, but there's still 60 days of consultation.
And I think it's also important to note that in October, the board reviews and approves the board's annual work plan. So although there's been a significant number of changes, there will be another opportunity in October.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer.
Thank you. Any other comments? Hearing none? Just, yeah, make sure we're not moving us so quickly that we're missing something. So we have two recommendations in front of us, and Trustee Beckering, you want to restate them and please be moved and seconded. but go
I
ahead.
think
Six hour recommendation.
policy 5, role of the board chair and role of the vice. They're on page 111 and 114.
Have there been any major changes to either one of those policies from the policies that they were originally?
They're essentially new policies.
Yeah, we created these with Leroy Sloan.
That's right.
And the only shaded area that has been revised is to, for the board chair, to attend all regularly called board chair meetings of the BC Trustees Association and Ministry of Education and Child Care.
Both these policies that are new. And are there any questions regarding policy 5 and policy 6? Hearing none. Moving on, there's one more I think we need to look at, do we not?
No,
That was
it.
the only one. So only two that we have to deal with.
I'm just doing that to the.
So we have these recommendations to rescind policy 1160, role of the board effective June 2022, and approve in principle policy 2, role of the board, policy 5, role of the board chair, and policy 6, role of the vice chair, and distribute them for 60 days to stakeholders and rights holders for input. They moved and seconded, all in favor? Unanimously approved. Moving on, go ahead, Trustee Becker.
Moving on to the role of the trustee. That the Board of Education rescind policy 1170, rights and responsibilities of trustees effective June 22nd, 2022, and that the Board of Education approves in principle policy 3, role of the trustee, and policy 4, trustee code of conduct, and distributes them for 60 days to stakeholders and right holders for input.
Seconder, please. Trustee Bennett, discussion. Go ahead, Trustee Becker.
Madam Chair, I think there are a few things that are highlighted in the role of trustee, and we probably should read those because we have an election coming up.
Okay, explain.
Go ahead, Trustee, Secretary Treasurer.
At the committee meeting for policy and governance, there was a request that we look at the rights of individual trustees included in policy 1170, rights and responsibilities of trustees, and ensure that each of those rights is also reflected in policy 3, role of the trustee. So all of the highlighted areas are areas where we have done that comparison and ensured that all of the rights and responsibilities of trustees have been reflected within policy 3.
Thank you. I'm assuming everyone has gone through this very carefully and is very aware of what the rights and responsibilities of trustees were under policy 1170. And with a careful look at policy 3, you will see, as the Secretary Treasurer has stated, that those rights have been reintegrated into the role of the trustee in policy 3. And
Yes, I can speak to policy 4 as well.
and the specific responsibilities of individual trustees also have been integrated into the policy. If there's any questions? Any questions or comments? Hearing none.
So
I think
policy,
we are ready to move that one forward, do we not? Or
I think policy 4, the trustee code of conduct, there's been major revisions, and I will ask the Secretary Treasurer then to speak to that.
thank you. Go
Um,
ahead.
At the committee meeting for policy and governance, it was determined that our trustee code of conduct was more of a trustee code of ethics that was currently in our policy 4, or that was being brought forward in policy 4. And we looked at language in other school districts to look at a specific trustee code of conduct rather than a trustee code of ethics. The trustee code of ethics is still part of the role of a trustee. However, a code of conduct is somewhat different. So we have looked at the Vancouver School Board's trustee code of conduct and the trustee code of conduct sanctions. So a number of the items have been struck out as they were aligning more with the trustee code of ethics. And we are following with presenting a trustee code of conduct and a trustee code of conduct sanctions.
Everyone had an opportunity to review carefully policy 4. Any questions around policy 4? Any questions about the trustee code of conduct sanctions? Hearing none. Trustee Mahoney, go ahead, trustee Mahoney. Just a minute, I'll just remove
There you
it.
go. Hey, Darlene, by any chance, did you look at Victoria's?
I did.
Okay.
The language in, the language in the Vancouver School Board's codes of conduct was more plain language. They all essentially say the same thing in ours. The sanctions said the same thing as well. The language in Vancouver is much more clear and much more concise.
No, I did, I looked up Victoria and Vancouver.
Yeah.
And Surrey. And I have to agree that Vancouver was the cut to the chase.
Yeah.
Thank you, trustee Mahoney. Trustee Beckery,
Well, I think that,
just a minute, so I need to give you a microphone. There you are.
I think the Secretary Treasurer has addressed the content, and I think if there are no questions, we can vote.
So the board, that the Board of Education rescind policy 1170, rights and responsibilities of trustees, effective June 22, 2022. And that the Board of Education approves in principle policy 3, role of the trustee, and policy 4, code of conduct, and distributes them for 60 days to stakeholders and rights holders for input. Being moved and seconded. All in favor? And that is unanimous. Moving right along, trustee Beckery, you're doing a fantastic job.
So, page 138, we're at the role of the superintendent. That the Board of Education rescind policy 2111, role of the superintendent, effective June 22nd, 2022. And the Board of Education approves in principle policy 12, role of the superintendent, and distribute it for 60 days to stakeholders and right holders for input. So that takes us to the page 154, from 139 to 154. So I hope everyone's had a chance to review that.
Question is that has there been any changes to the role of the superintendent from its policy 112111 to policy 12, Secretary Treasurer?
Policy 2111 was developed and last updated in 2018. There are very few changes to role of the superintendent. One of the changes that came forward at the Policy and Governance Committee meeting was that on 8.4, that we add and approval of the addition or removal of positions to the school organization chart.
Thank you. Any further discussion around policy, the recommendation regarding the role of the superintendent? None. The recommendation then is that the Board of Education rescind policy 2111, role of the superintendent, effective June 22, 2022, and that the board approves in principle policy 12, role of the superintendent, and distribute it for 60 days to stakeholders and rights holders for input.
Sorry, was this second to that?
That was there, what it was moved and seconded, the recommendation.
I know.
Tim seconded?
Did you?
I don't believe there was a second.
Okay, then we have, it was, recommendation is we moved that.
I'll second
Seconded
that.
trustee Palello. And there has
Thank
been discussion. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor? And that too is unanimous.
Okay, moving right along, everyone. Bylaw 2, that's page 155. The recommendation that bylaw 2 indemnification be given first reading, and that bylaw 2,
So you have to.
oh, we have to first reading.
So I have a motion,
That's Betty.
recommendation. Trustee Palello second, first reading. Go ahead, trustee Beckery.
No, you don't speak to first reading.
No, just read.
You need to vote.
Yeah, all in favor of first reading? That's unanimous. Go ahead, trustee Beckery.
That bylaw 2 indemnification be given second reading and distributed for 60 days to stakeholders and rights holders for input prior to the third and final reading.
Thank you, trustee Beckery. It's been, trustee recommendation moved, seconded, please. Trustee Mahoney. And now, any discussion? There can be discussion after second reading. Any questions or discussions regarding the indemnification bylaws? Just go ahead, Secretary Treasurer.
Thank you. The indemnification bylaw is something that's new to the district, which is why we are only bringing it forward for first and second reading, because it is new and not currently in practice of the district. And it would be better if we do this and put it up for consultation before we actually adopt it in principle.
Thank you. And I'm assuming everyone has had an opportunity to review this and read it. Trustee, call the question. So trustee Bennett, you have a question. Go ahead. Now we're having, I've got you.
Thank you. Push through to Secretary Treasurer with the 60 days, not including summer. We are really looking at this not coming back for third reading until probably the November board meeting, if my head is right.
Yeah.
Are there any operational concerns with not having this as a principle prior to the end of November?
Go ahead, Secretary Treasurer.
I believe that there is indemnification already indicated in the school act. We just don't have a bylaw for it. So there is some protection already afforded trustees in the performance of their duties.
Thank you.
And we wouldn't be doing anything different than we have at the current moment.
Any further questions regarding the bylaw 2 indemnification recommendation? We are now at second reading, and it has been moved and seconded. All in favor of second reading, and that is passed unanimously. Moving right along.
Okay. Bylaw 3 elections. Recommendation that the Board of Education rescind bylaw number 5 elections, a bylaw to provide for the determination of various procedures for the conduct of trustee elections effective June 22nd, 2022. And that in accordance with section 68 of the School Act, all 3 readings of bylaw 3 elections be given at tonight's meeting.
Just that's, it's been, you've just moved that. Can I have a seconder for the giving all 3 readings tonight? Seconded, Trustee Thompson. All in favor of giving the bylaw reading tonight?
That needs to be unanimous.
It's unanimous.
Thank you.
Go ahead, trustee Beckery.
And that bylaw 3 elections be given first reading.
Seconder, please. Trustee Palello. All in favor of first reading? We moved in second, first reading, first reading, I guess, for that. Go ahead, trustee Beckery. That's unanimous.
That bylaw 3 elections be given second reading.
Seconded, please, trustee Thompson. Any discussion? Secretary Treasurer.
So I just wanted to let trustees know that the last bylaw 5 was updated October 21st because we had a by-election in January of 2022. No changes have been made between the bylaw number 5. It's essentially a renumbering, which is why we're getting all three readings this evening.
Any questions regarding the bylaw 3 elections being given second reading? Being moved and seconded. All in favor of second reading? And that's unanimous. Go ahead, trustee Beckering.
That bylaw 3 elections be given third and final reading.
Seconder, please, trustee Thompson. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? And everyone unanimously, third and final reading is passed.
So, bylaw number 5, so rescind,
No,
yeah.
I think we're on page 167.
Policy and delegation.
One more left.
One more.
Well, two more things.
Two more.
but yeah.
You're good. You're doing good.
Okay. Policy and delegation of authority. Recommendation that the Board of Education rescind policy 8310, policy and policy development effective June 22nd, 2022, and that the Board of Education approves in principle policy 10, policy and policy development, and policy 11, board delegation of authority, and distributes them for 60 days to stakeholders and right holders for input.
Recommendation has been moved. Seconder, please. Trustee Mahoney. Go ahead, trustee Beckering. Any comments?
Well, I think there seems to be very little, just other than some of the shaded areas of policy 10, policy development, that with the different committees, the advisory committee will be very involved with the policy development. Policy approval and implementation is through the advisory committee. That new policy, major revision, policy revisions and minor revisions requiring further consultation will be distributed for feedback on the policy draft. And consultative feedback will be forwarded to the advisory committee prior to final policy recommendation to the board.
And we have tried to develop a flowchart process so that you can follow it through the needs identified, the policy development revision, the policy approval implementation stages.
Oh, I like that, yeah.
I also note that item 17 on policy 10 has been added.
Oh, yeah.
And this is a very important part of that because the board shall evaluate administrative procedures to determine their capacity to carry out the intention and spirit of the relevant policy. This is embedded in policy, so all administrative procedures would comply with policy 10.
And we did slightly reorganize the original policy 10 that came forward in order to align it more with the flow of the process and to ensure that when the superintendent informs the board of substantive changes to administrative procedures, that then it flows that the board would evaluate those procedures, and that if the board feels that those administrative procedures should be made into policy, that the board would provide a rationale and move forward in that manner.
Good. All very accountable. Trustee Bennett.
Sorry,
Hi.
that's my fault.
It's okay. I'm just going to just take, there you are. No, I have. I'm just going to put you back on in a minute, Rachel. Go ahead, Ken.
You had him earlier, it went off. Just turn on my microphone. There you go. Okay.
I can turn mine.
My question is actually through, I guess, to the Secretary Treasurer, looking at policy 10. So in what was the previous bylaw one, back in the day, I'm looking at what was regulation 3.6.5, which gave that there were the odd instances where policy would not necessarily come to policy governance, or members would be excluded from policy governance because of perceived conflict. Not that there are necessarily the same level of HR policies in the new manual. I'm just wondering if there needs to be some form of clause that does give the board the ability to bypass advisory in the event that there is, like, I'm thinking the example we talked about before was like staff leave policy or things like that. I recognize that a lot has moved to administrative procedures, But in the event that there is a policy that is more of an HR related issue, I'm wondering if we do need to have some form of clause in policy 10 that allows the board to address a policy in camera in rare circumstances.
Certainly. And I believe that policy or that number 13 speaks to that, and so does 12 a bit. That says that in the absence of an existing policy, the board may make decisions by resolution. But we can add something that the board can always change its policies by resolution.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to, and I was hesitant to bring it forward because I don't want it to become a tool for future boards to use to bypass advisory. Like that's not the intent, but I just also wanted to flag that there could be instances where it may not be appropriate to come to advisory.
So don't you think that covers it? Tim, in the absence of existing policy, the board may make decisions by resolution.
I would disagree, but
I think I can incorporate some wording before we send it out to partner groups for input.
and again, I don't want it to be restrictive enough that also sets up future boards and the loopholes with, because the whole point of having voter advisory is to get consultation. And I don't want there to be an easy clause out for things to bypass advisory. But at the same point, I'm trying to flag that there could be an issue where the board needs to have that ability. Certainly so. Thank you.
Are there any further questions or comments? Rachel, did you have a, yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I have an issue with 17, page 176. The board shall evaluate the administrative procedures to determine their capacity to carry out the intention and spirit of the relevant policy. We've taken out the word, the board shall approve administrative policies. This was brought up by the chair a few weeks back. By evaluating, it already means that the administrative procedures have already been approved by senior administration. No disrespect to senior administration, but I think that as the board being evaluating them is a fluff word. It's the same as receiving. It should be approved.
I think I'll let the chair answer.
I can't answer that because I fully agree with items with 17. In our discussions around the word approval, the process was really about accountability. It was about the board being accountable in some ways for decisions that were being made to the administration of an effective operation of the schools. And in that conversation, we looked at Nanaimo's policies, and Nanaimo had a clear statement around evaluation of administrative procedures. And evaluation is a very important word because to evaluate, you have to look carefully at the procedure and you have to essentially understand what that procedure is intending to do. How is it intending to be used in terms of the operation of the district? So this gives the board a very accountable role to how it will evaluate the efficient and effective operation of the school district, which is its responsibility under the School Act. And so the word approval could also be a fluff word because one can approve something without even going through an evaluation process. So the evaluation process, in my estimation, is the strongest route that a board could take in order to ensure its work is efficient and the work of the district is efficient and effective. So that's how I would respond. I understand your question, Trustee Weber, and I know I did bring that forward, but I fully support the process of evaluation. I see it as a much more substantial decision that the board should have to make.
Thank you, Chair.
But I understand your thought. Any further discussion? Did you have follow-up? Did you have follow-up? Any further discussion? Secretary Treasurer.
Sorry, there were a couple of little changes that came out of the Policy and Governance Committee work. On policy 11, board delegation of authority, there were some additions, and they're highlighted in gray. Sorry, that's page 178.
Develop, implement, approve, and evaluate. Please go, you get your approve and.
That's in the approving.
Well, the board always approves its policies.
This is the delegation.
Yes. Any other comments? Thank you for that, Secretary Treasurer.
I was really happy to see the new policies and major policy revisions and minor revisions requiring for the consultation will be distributed.
For a 60-day period, I think maintaining that process is a good thought. It's a good idea. It keeps the community involved. Trustee Bennett.
Thank you very much. Just looking at the flow chart on page 177. Does the consultation feedback go back to advisory and then to the board?
Yes. So it says consultation feedback will be forwarded to the advisory committee prior to final policy recommendation to the board. That's number 10.
Yeah, I know. I was sorry. I was looking directly at the flow chart.
Oh, sorry, it's the consultation period as applicable.
Okay. I was just wondering if we needed to put in the flow chart, the visual that we needed, that it goes to advisory and then to the board.
Certainly.
Good recommendation. Trustee Mahoney, go ahead.
I'm going back to item 17. The word approve, the board shall evaluate administrative procedures to determine their capacity. If you evaluate them, you're either going to approve or you're going to disapprove them. I'm not wrong there. So in actual fact, the word approve is going to come in there somewhere. Not here, but when you evaluate.
Yes, indirectly. Yes.
Indirectly, okay, thanks.
Trustee Weber. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So just a comment to Milton or to Trustee Mahoney. So if it is going to eventually be approved or not approved, then why not say approved in the policy in 17?
And I appreciate what you just said. We sort of, we have explored that, and it has come to our attention that administrative procedures are not approved in the language in all other administrative procedures that we have looked at. There is no language that would say the board approves, but there is strong language that would say the board evaluates. And given the point that Trustee Mahoney just made, when you're evaluating, you're considering you're weighing the merits of that administrative procedure in terms of effectiveness. And so I think I can understand the argument, but I think the position that evaluation, at any rate, I would ask anyone else if they have concerns, but I certainly support the item number 17.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Question.
Yeah, I think we're getting bogged down, and I don't want to get bogged down on it. Go ahead.
Question.
Call the
Call the
question.
question.
Okay, we have had substantial, this will be going out actually for approval and 60 days, and it is approved in principle. So we can get feedback from the community as well. So that will come back to the board when the 60 days have lapsed. So we have a recommendation in front of us. Trustee Beckwith, you go ahead and read it again.
I've lost it.
You have lost it.
Recommendations.
I'll find it.
Thank you.
On page 167.
Oh, thanks. Okay. That the Board of Education rescind policy 8310, policy and policy development effective June 22nd, 2022. That the Board of Education approves in principle policy 10, policy and policy development, and policy 11, board delegation of authority, and distributes them for 60 days to stakeholders and rights holders for input.
We look at policy.
board delegation. Yeah, she would-
Okay, she did,
I
okay.
did, yeah. It's been moved, the recommendation be moved. I just want to double check.
Seconded by trustee Palello. Are there any further discussion on that, the recommendation of policy 10? Question be called, all in favor? Unanimous? No? Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, opposed? Trustee Weber is, please don't, trustee Weber's opposition. And did I get everybody else? Was everyone else unanimous or in favor? I'm sorry. I didn't see all hands up. I think Betty, trustee Becker and trustee Buckle, trustee Bennett, trustee Brown, and trustee Thompson, and in opposition was trustee Weber. Okay, where are we headed?
The very last one, Chair,
Thank you.
it's on page 179.
Good.
Administrative procedures, policy and administrative procedure development and dissemination. Recommendation that the Board of Education receives the following administrative procedures as per policy 10, policy and policy development, effective June 22nd, 2022 is presented. AP 120, policy and procedures dissemination, and AP 121, development and review of administrative procedures. In the last few pages.
Thank you. And the recommendation has been moved. Can I have a seconder? Trustee Bennett? Sure. Thank you. Any discussion around recommendation? Any discussion that needs to take place? Has there been any changes to this administrative procedure? I don't believe so.
Not from the committee.
No. Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the recommendation? Trustee Thompson, trustee Palello, trustee Beckering, trustee Mahoney, trustee Bennett, and trustee Weber. Opposed?
How can I prove that if I just close this one?
Okay. You are opposed.
Yeah.
All right. And so we have 5 and 1, 6 and 1. I'm not going to name them again. It's 9:45.
And
Got it?
Madam Chair,
Pass.
that's policy and governance over and out.
Wow, there's a flow meeting for you.
Well, I have to tell you all, that was an enormous amount of work, and compliments to all of you for being so efficient and having done your reading and prepared to have this discussion. We now move to the rest of the agenda, and we have just reports from various trustees, I believe.
District administration reports first.
Yeah.
Secretary.
Superintendent, old business, sorry.
Pardon?
Any old business?
Oh, old business, is there any? I don't think there was. Okay. No old business. And so we have district administrative reports. Superintendent. I'll find it.
Thank you. I just want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the work of the district this year, the journey. This year was definitely one of great learning. In addition to variants and COVID, we implemented a new strategic plan, worked on coherence of our system. We developed a strong sense of direction through our strategic plan, our special advisors report, through action plans such as DRIPA, through the formation of the Indigenous Education Leadership Table, working with them, and really seeing the district and community coming together through new and renewed relationships. I just want to extend gratitude and thanks to everybody, including our senior team, principals and vice principals, teachers and associates, our support staff, our inside workers, QB 4991, the guys with the tools and gals with the tools that do tremendous work to keep our schools going well, and parents and families, and finally the students, and acknowledging that they are the reason we're here. And it's been an honor learning, growing, and laughing with all of you. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Moving on to trustee reports, trustee Palello.
As submitted.
Yes. We can all read. And BC Public School Employers Association, I'm actually going to speak on behalf of that for trustee Beckering. And I think I will just echo trustee Beckering's comments that bargaining is in process.
And we're hearing that it is moving along in a friendly way, that there is, the BCBC is in the middle of their strategic planning. And I have to say, congratulations to this board, because you spent an hour and some 15 minutes answering a survey that BCPC has used, the board of directors has used to actually revamp their strategic planning. And I have to tell you, your responses were very similar to the responses across the province. So you need to know that you were heard. And there will be new trustee orientation in October 15th, after the election day. And there will be a symposium 2022, which will be held in November. And the BCPC AGM will be in January of 2023. And there's all kinds of other things going on, but I do want to give a shout out to the Encore Learning, HR Learning and Support. Some of the programs that they offer are really very good. And next year for trustees to take advantage of some of them, particularly having productive workplace interactions, is an excellent workshop and one that trustees can certainly benefit from. And other than that, I will conclude that report for BCPC. And moving on to the next one is our District Parent Advisory Council, Trustee Colello.
As submitted.
Thank you, Trustee Colello. District Student Advisory Council, I had the pleasure of attending District Student Advisory Council at their last meeting. It was incredible. Hats off to Lee and Kat for their work in supporting the students in their live event, which was, I tell you, Bystanders Against Racism. And Trustee Bennett has already spoken to it, but it is an awesome, incredible live event where these students have created a learning series, and there are 4,000 students and staff around the province engaged in that learning series. And it just is an incredible testimony to the type of kids we have in our district and the work that's supporting them. So thank you all. And moving on, Indigenous Education Advisory Committee, Trustee Palello.
Guess what? Submitted.
Wow, you've seen us all, Trustee Palello, because we have not submitted ours. We have to tell them various trustee reports, Trustee Palello.
Busy, as submitted.
And we can all say ditto because we attended most of the meetings that Trustee Palello did. However, we have correspondence dated June 10th to the Minister of Finance regarding our funding, and it's a really good letter. And thank you, Trustee Bennett, for making that possible. It's gone out to, and we hope we get a response. And finally, everyone have a wonderful summer. A restful, we still have meetings and work to do, but I was hoping to do a final wrap up, but it's 10:02 and it's time. Motion to adjourn, Trustee Bennett.
All in favor?
Weber and Trustee, Trustee Campbell. All in favor of adjourning? Oh, that's unanimous. Thank you so much.